Welcome back to another story on Eclipse Wizardry. This time, we're bringing you, what if Fleur Delacour found Harry alone at age 6 and Veela Queen Mother declared him destined lord of their nation. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Silver Grove. The cupboard under the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive had a smell that Harry Potter knew better than almost anything else in the world. Dust, old wood, and something faintly chemical from the cleaning supplies Vernon made him stack in the corner. He'd learned to breathe through his mouth when he first woke up, before his nose adjusted. He'd learned a lot of small things like that: how to be quiet, how to make himself small, how to eat fast when food was given because it might not be given again. He was 6 years old and he was very good at surviving. What he was not good at, and had never managed to learn no matter how hard he tried, was making things stop happening. The row had started over breakfast. Dudley had wanted the last rasher of bacon and Harry had already eaten it, not greedily, just quickly, because quick was safe, and that had been enough. Vernon's face had gone through its familiar color progressions, pink to red to the deep, dangerous purple that meant the belt might come out, and Harry had done the only thing that ever actually worked: he'd run. Out the back door, through the garden gate, down Privet Drive at a flat sprint with his 2 large shoes slapping the pavement. He was small for his age and his legs weren't long, but fear is extraordinary fuel, and he put 4 streets between himself and number 4 before he slowed down enough to think about where he was going. Nowhere, was the honest answer. He never had anywhere to go. He walked for a long time. The morning was cold and grey, the way October mornings in Surrey are cold and grey, not dramatically, not cinematically, just flatly miserable. His jumper had been Dudley's and hung off one shoulder. He hadn't eaten enough of that bacon to sustain a run like that, and his stomach was already complaining about it. He found the path by accident. It wasn't on any road he recognized, and he'd walked enough of little whinging streets in his years of wandering that he knew most of them. It was a gap between 2 garden walls, barely wide enough for him to walk through sideways, and it shouldn't have been there. There were houses on both sides that shared those walls, he was almost certain, but the gap was there, and beyond it was a path of pressed earth, and beyond the path was a tree line that little whinging absolutely did not have. Harry stood at the gap for a moment. Then his stomach growled and his shoulder ached where he'd caught the doorframe on his way out, and he thought, with the clear and unsentimental logic of a child who has already learned that nowhere is safe, at least this is somewhere different. He went through. The trees closed around him almost immediately. Oak and ash and silver birch, the ground soft with fallen leaves, the air abruptly warmer than it had any right to be in October. Not warm like summer, warm like a room where someone had recently been sitting, that particular inhabited warmth. Harry walked carefully, watching where he put his feet, and the path wound between the trees and eventually opened into a clearing. It was a small clearing, roughly circular, with a ring of silver birch trees at its edge. The birches were flowering. That was the first strange thing: they were flowering, white blossoms against silver bark in October, which Harry didn't know enough botany to articulate as impossible but knew instinctively as wrong in a good way, the way a dream sometimes has details that shouldn't be there but that make you feel safer rather than frightened. The second strange thing was the light. It came from everywhere and nowhere in particular, soft and silver white, and it made the clearing look like somewhere that existed slightly outside of the regular afternoon. Harry sat down at the base of one of the birch trees, drew his knees up to his chest, and, because he was 6 years old and alone and had been running since before breakfast, he fell asleep. He woke up to someone poking him in the shoulder. Not hard. Tentative, actually, like the person doing the poking wasn't entirely sure he was real. He opened his eyes and found himself looking up at a girl. She was maybe 9 or 10, with silvery blonde hair that caught the light in ways that hair didn't usually catch light, and pale skin, and eyes that were a shade of grey-blue that made Harry think inexplicably of the sea even though he'd never seen the sea. She was wearing a nice coat, pale grey wool, and she was crouching in front of him with her head tilted to one side the way birds tilt their heads when they're deciding whether something is food or a threat. She said something in French. Harry blinked. I don't speak French. The girl's eyes narrowed slightly, recalibrating. When she spoke again it was in English, accented but precise, each word placed carefully like she was arranging them by hand. You are sleeping under Grandmere's tree. Sorry, Harry said automatically. Then, because he was cold and tired and too hungry for social performance, is it actually her tree? She says all the silver trees are hers. The girl paused. I think she believes it. Do you? Something shifted in the girl's expression. She was quiet for a moment, assessing him. I think you should not be here alone, she said finally. How old are you? Where is your family? Harry considered the question. I'm 6, he said. And they're on Privet Drive. I left. Why? My uncle was going to hit me. He said it the way he said most things about the Dursleys, flatly, without drama, because drama had never helped. But something happened to the girl's face when he said it. The careful politeness cracked open slightly and underneath it was something fierce and immediate. He hits you? Sometimes. Harry looked at his hands. I usually get out before he does. The girl stood up. She was still looking at him with that fierce, immediate expression. Then she turned toward the edge of the clearing and called out, in French, something that Harry couldn't follow but that had the unmistakable tone of you need to come and look at this right now. The woman who came into the clearing was not Fleur's mother, though Harry didn't know that yet. She was old. Not elderly old, not the comfortable roundness of someone's old the way certain things are old, the way stone walls are old, the way deep water is old. Her hair was white and she wore it loose, and it moved slightly even though the air in the clearing was still. She was tall, considerably taller than the girl, and she walked with a straight-backed composure that made the clearing feel like it was her room and she'd simply allowed them into it. Her eyes were extraordinary. Silver-gray and very bright, and when they found Harry they stopped. Not in the way that adults usually stopped when they looked at him, with impatience, irritation, the calculation of what he was going to cost. This was different. This was recognition. She said something in French. Her voice was low and unhurried, the voice of someone who had never needed to raise it. She asks, the girl translated, watching Harry carefully now, if you know what this place is. No, Harry said. The old woman said something else. She asks if it felt like it called you. Harry opened his mouth to say no to that too, because it sounded like the sort of thing mad people said. Then he remembered the gap between the garden walls that shouldn't have been there, and the path that hadn't been there yesterday, and the flowering birch trees in October. Maybe, he said carefully. The old woman looked at him for a long moment. Then she walked toward him and crouched down, not the girl's tentative crouch but the deliberate, unhurried movement of someone who'd made a decision, and she took his face in her hands. Her hands were cool and dry and they held his face gently, tilting it toward the silver light. She looked at him. Not at his scar, which was what adults usually looked at eventually, always trying to be subtle about it and never quite managing. She looked at him, at his eyes, at something she seemed to find behind them. She was still for a very long time. Then she said, quietly and with tremendous certainty, 5 words in French. The girl made a sharp sound. Grandmere, the old woman said something else, brief and definitive, the tone of someone closing a debate before it started. What did she say? Harry asked. The girl, Fleur, he'd learn her name in the next few minutes, and he wouldn't forget it for the rest of his life, was staring at her grandmother with an expression he couldn't quite read. Something between awe and protest. She looked back at Harry. She says, Fleur said slowly, that you are the Lord of the Silver Nation. A pause. And that she has been waiting a very long time for you. Harry looked at the old woman. I'm 6, he said again, on the grounds that this seemed relevant. The old woman, Seraphine, Fleur's great-grandmother, the Queen Mother of the Veela, looked at him and then, for the first time, she smiled. It was a small smile, private and genuine, nothing like the smiles adults usually gave him, which were either false, bright, or mean. She said something. Fleur translated. She says she knows. She says this is not a problem. He stayed in the clearing for 3 hours. Seraphine sent Fleur to fetch food from somewhere, Harry didn't ask where, and Fleur disappeared through the trees and came back with bread and cheese and fruit that was slightly too perfect looking for October in Surrey, and Harry ate it with the focused efficiency of someone who'd learned not to hesitate around food. Seraphine watched him eat without making the slightly revolted face most adults made when they watched him eat quickly. "You are Harry Potter," Fleur said. She'd settled cross-legged on the ground across from him, her nice coat apparently not a concern. "We know who you are. Everyone in the magical world knows who you are." Harry looked up from the bread. "I'm not in the magical world. Your guardians keep you from it. This is..." She glanced at her grandmother and said something in French, a question. Seraphine responded with a word that sounded crisp and final. "This is wrong," Fleur translated. "I know," Harry said. "Do you know what you did? 5 years ago? What you did to the Dark Lord? I've heard bits." He paused. "Mostly from Dudley. He says I'm a freak and my parents were criminals. But he says a lot of things." Fleur's expression did the cracking open thing again. She had a very expressive face for someone trying to look composed. "Your parents were not criminals. Your father was a respected wizard. Your mother was," another quick check with Seraphine, "remarkable. And what you did was save many, many lives." "I was one," Harry said. "How did I do anything at one?" "This," said Fleur, and she gestured at him in a way that encompassed something beyond the visible, "is what my grandmother wants to explain. But her English is not," she made a wobbling gesture with her hand, "precise enough for what she needs to say. So I will translate." "But Harry," she paused, seeming to choose her next words with unusual care for a 10-year-old, "you should know that she is not, she does not say things she does not mean. She is very serious. What she told you before, about the Silver Nation. She means it." Harry looked at Seraphine, who was watching him with that same bright, certain attention. "All right," he said. "Tell me." "The Veela," Fleur explained, translating her grandmother's low, measured French with the focused intensity of a child performing her most important task, were not simply what the magical world's textbooks said they were. The books called them semi-human magical beings, which was technically accurate the way calling a river some water was technically accurate. The Veela were ancient, older than most wizarding institutions, with their own governance, their own history, their own territorial rights across half of magical Europe. They called themselves the Silver Nation, La Nation Argentée, because silver was the color of moonlight and moonlight was the oldest magic, predating wands, predating spoken incantation, predating almost everything. The Queen Mother was not a figurehead. She was the spiritual and political center of the nation, the keeper of its oldest magics, and she had held the position for longer than most people in the magical world had been alive. And the Queen Mother, Fleur Delacour, had been carrying a piece of knowledge for 37 years. The prophecy, and Harry's expression when Fleur said the word prophecy made Seraphine pause and say something short that Fleur translated as, "Yes, I know, they are annoying, but this one is ours and it is old." The prophecy was not the one the British wizarding world fussed over. It was Veela. It had been spoken by a seer 3 generations back, in the language of the Silver Fire, and it spoke of a lord not born who would stand at the center of the nation's greatest trial. Not a Veela. A soul bound to silver, found in a grove of flowering birches. She says, Fleur translated, watching Harry's face, that the grove does not flower for anyone. In 50 years she has brought 17 candidates here. The trees never bloomed. Today they bloomed before you even arrived, before we got here. She says the grove was already flowering when they reached the path. Harry looked at the white blossoms above him. That's not because of me. Trees just, sometimes, Seraphine spoke, firmly. She says don't argue about the trees, Fleur said, and then very quickly, in a lower voice, I agree with her, they are very clearly doing something unusual, Harry. Something in the way she said his name, Harry, not boy, not the child, just his name with the slight softening of her accent, made him stop arguing about the trees. So what does it mean, he said. Lord of the Silver Nation. What does that actually mean for me? Seraphine spoke for longer this time, and Fleur listened with her brow slightly furrowed, occasionally asking a clarifying question, and when she turned back to Harry her expression was careful and serious in a way that made her look older than 10. She says it does not mean she owns you. She is, Fleur paused, she is being very clear about this. This is a destiny of choice. The prophecy says the Lord is found, but it does not say he must accept. She will not compel you. The nation will not compel you. Another pause. She says she has waited 37 years and she will not ruin it by being stupid about it now. Harry looked at Seraphine. Seraphine raised one white eyebrow very slightly, which seemed to mean well. What would I get? Harry asked. If I said yes. What does it mean, actually, in practice? Not in prophecy. The eyebrow came down. Seraphine looked, for just a moment, deeply satisfied with the question, and she spoke at considerable length. Education, Fleur translated. Real education, Veela magic, European magical tradition, languages, politics. Not just Hogwarts. Protection, the nation's protection, which is not nothing, her words. A family, Fleur's voice went slightly careful there, of sorts. People who know what you are and want nothing from it except that you grow into it. Another pause. She says that you are currently living in a house where you are being starved and hit by muggles who fear you. She says this is unacceptable. She says she would very much like to remove you from it immediately, except that the British magical law is, Fleur asked her grandmother something, fastidious. Complicated. Irritating. She says it will take time to do it properly. But that she will do it. Harry sat with this for a while. The afternoon light through the birch trees was gold now, shifting toward evening. He would need to go back soon or the Dursleys would call someone. He didn't want to go back. Can you actually do all of that? He asked, looking at Seraphine directly. Or is this like when Petunia says things will be different and then they're not? Seraphine listened to the translation. Then she looked at Harry with those silver-gray eyes and she said something short and unequivocal. She says, Fleur said, and there was something in her voice now, something warm and almost amused, that she is the Queen Mother of the Silver Nation, and she has not made a promise she did not keep in 81 years, and she does not intend to start now. Harry looked at her for a long moment. Seraphine held his gaze without blinking, without shifting, with the absolute stillness of someone who has nothing to prove. All right, Harry said. He walked back to Privet Drive as the streetlights were coming on. The path behind him, when he turned to look, was already closing, the gap between the garden walls narrowing, the tree-line fading back into the flat mundane shrubbery of suburban Surrey as if it had never been anything else. But he had Fleur's address in his pocket, written on a page torn from the small notebook she'd had in her coat pocket, in her neat, slightly formal handwriting. And he had a letter from Seraphine, sealed with silver wax that smelled faintly of something floral and sharp, addressed in French to whomever it was she needed to address regarding the process of getting Harry Potter out of a cupboard. He let himself in through the kitchen door. Vernon was in the living room watching television, the sound of it loud enough that Harry's arrival went unnoticed. He went to the cupboard, sat down in the dark with the letter in his hands, and thought about flowering birch trees and grey-blue eyes and an old woman who looked at him like he was a person. He didn't feel different. He felt, actually, he realized, he felt something he didn't have an exact word for at 6. He had the concept of it, the bodily sensation of it, though, the feeling you get when you've been carrying something heavy for so long that you've forgotten it's heavy, and someone takes it from you, just for a moment, and your shoulders remember what light feels like. He put the letter carefully under the loose floorboard where he kept his small collection of things the Dursleys hadn't found, a photograph of a woman who might be his mother, a 10-pence piece he'd found in the gutter, a smooth grey pebble from the park, and he lay down on his thin mattress in the dark. Above him, through the thin wall, he could hear Dudley complaining about something. Vernon's voice rumbled a response, indulgent and warm. Harry closed his eyes. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, a formal delegation from the Veela Nation arrived at number 4, Privet Drive. Petunia Dursley opened the door to 3 women who were, in Petunia's internal vocabulary, disturbingly beautiful, and an old woman who was beautiful in a way that made the words seem completely inadequate, and something happened to her face that Harry, watching from the top of the stairs where he'd been told to wait, recognized as the specific expression of someone whose entire understanding of the world has just shifted slightly on its foundations. Mrs. Dursley, said the youngest of the 3 women, she was perhaps 30, dark-haired, with Fleur's eyes, in clear, precise English. My name is Fleur Delacour. This is my mother, Isabel, and my colleague Madame Renard. And this, she gestured to the white-haired woman, is my grandmother, Veela Delacour, Queen Mother of the Veela Nation. We are here regarding your nephew. Petunia said, with admirable composure, he's not, and then Seraphine looked at her and Petunia stopped talking. Seraphine looked at Petunia Dursley the way she had looked at the clearing, at Harry, at everything, with complete and unhurried attention, and she said something in French that Apollon translated without inflection. My grandmother says that she is aware you were given charge of Harry Potter because his mother was your sister and because Albus Dumbledore made certain decisions without consulting anyone. She says she does not hold you entirely responsible for what has occurred in this house. She says she is giving you this courtesy once, cooperate with what comes next, and it will go smoothly. Do not cooperate, and she will have a conversation with the International Confederation of Wizards that will be significantly less comfortable for everyone in this room except herself. Petunia opened and closed her mouth. May we come in? Apollon said pleasantly. They came in. Harry came down the stairs. Seraphine looked at him across the Dursleys' extremely normal sitting room, with its horse brasses and its floral sofa and its large television, and she said something brief. She says, Apollon translated, that you look better than she hoped and worse than she would like, and that this will be corrected. I've been eating more, Harry said. Since October. I got better at sneaking food. Apollon translated this. Seraphine listened, and her expression did something complex and private, and then she said one word that Harry didn't need translated because he knew it already. Fleur had taught him it the second time they'd met, in the clearing, because she'd said it was one of the most important words in French. Inacceptable. Vernon chose this moment to come in from the kitchen, having clearly heard the arrival of strangers and decided it was time to establish the appropriate social hierarchy. He was a large man. He was aware of being a large man. He used it the way some men use size, as a statement, before he'd even said anything. He took one look at the women on his sofa and something in his expression shifted in a way that Harry recognized and hated, that particular look, assessing and diminishing at once, and he said, Who the bloody hell are you? Seraphine turned to look at Vernon. She didn't say anything. She simply looked at him with her silver-grey eyes and her absolute stillness, and Vernon Dursley, who was 6'2" and very convinced of his own authority, did something Harry had never seen him do. He went quiet. Not politely quiet. Not I'm being deferential quiet. The quiet of someone whose body has made a decision before their brain has caught up with it, the quiet of an animal that has just registered the presence of something larger than itself in the hierarchy of the world. Apollon smiled, pleasantly. Please sit down, Mr. Dursley. We have some paperwork to discuss. The paperwork was, as Seraphine had said, fastidious. British magical law, particularly the sections governing wizarding children placed with Muggle relatives, was labyrinthine in ways that suggested it had been written to be navigated by people who already knew how. The Dursleys' guardianship was protected by a blood charm keyed to Lily Potter's sacrifice, which complicated things, and Dumbledore had apparently filed documentation that made straightforward removal difficult. Harry sat through the initial meeting in the sitting room and watched Fleur Delacour navigate Vernon Dursley with the calm efficiency of someone defusing something predictable, and thought about what Fleur had told him in the clearing 2 weeks ago when she'd appeared again, without her grandmother, and they'd talked for 4 hours. "He thinks he's protecting you," she'd said. "Dumbledore. He believes the blood wards are necessary. He might even be right about that." "But?" Harry had said, because he'd already figured out there was a but. "But he didn't ask you," Fleur had said. "He didn't ask you what you needed. He put you there like a piece on a board and then he left you there. And my grandmother says," she'd paused, "she says that is the difference between protection and ownership. Real protection explains itself." Harry had turned this over for 2 weeks. He'd looked at his cupboard and his thin mattress and the lock on the outside of the door and he'd thought, this is what ownership looks like. The meeting ended with an agreement. Harry would remain at Privet Drive until his 11th birthday. The blood wards were genuinely important, Apollon conceded, and Seraphine conceded it too, grudgingly, with a remark that made Apollon press her lips together to suppress a smile, but the terms of his living situation would change. There would be monitoring, formal Veela Nation monitoring, with legal teeth. There would be nutrition and clothing and a proper bedroom. There would be visits, regular visits, to France. And there would be education. Seraphine looked at Harry across the sitting room when all of it was settled, and she said something. Apollon translated, softer now. She says, "From today you are the Lord of the Silver Nation, even if the world does not know it yet." She says titles are nothing. The education is everything. The people who will love you are everything. She says, she asks if you understand. Harry looked at Seraphine. He thought about the flowering birch trees and the cold October morning and the gap in the garden wall that had appeared exactly when he needed it to. "Yes," he said. "I understand." Seraphine nodded once. Then she looked at Petunia and Vernon, both of whom were sitting very upright on their floral sofa with the expressions of people who've agreed to terms they're not certain they fully understood, and she said something that Harry was fairly sure, from the tone, was a warning. He didn't ask Apollon to translate it. He didn't need to. Vernon's color had gone from red back to a pale, careful beige, and Petunia was looking at her hands, and that was translation enough. Outside, through the sitting room window, Harry could see the street. Privet Drive looked exactly the same as it always had, neat hedges, identical doors, the particular grayness of a British Tuesday afternoon in November. He looked at it and felt, for the first time, like it had absolutely nothing to do with him. That night, in a proper bedroom, they'd moved him into the smallest spare room, which Seraphine had looked at with barely concealed contempt but was still 15 times better than the cupboard. Harry lay on an actual bed with actual sheets and looked at the ceiling. He thought about Fleur, who had poked him awake in a magical clearing and then argued with her grandmother in rapid French on his behalf and then sat cross-legged on the ground in her nice coat and told him what he was, matter-of-factly, like it was important information he deserved to have rather than a secret being kept from him for his own good. He thought about Seraphine, who was the most completely certain person he'd ever met, and how certainty in adults usually meant they were about to do something terrible, but with her it felt different. It felt like standing next to a wall, something solid that wasn't going to move. He thought about the word Lord, which was large and strange and didn't mean anything yet to a 6-year-old boy in Surrey. He thought about the letter that had arrived that afternoon, slipped under the spare room door by Apollon on her way out, which he'd read 4 times already. It was from Fleur, written in the same neat careful handwriting as her address, and it said, "I know today was a lot. Grandmere says you were very calm about everything, which she considers a good sign. I think you were probably just tired. Either way, welcome to the family, I suppose. I will write every week. My grandmother will send a Veela post bird. They are more reliable than owls and considerably more intimidating if someone tries to intercept them. I have started making a list of things I want to teach you. It is already very long. Fleur Harry read it a fifth time. Then he folded it carefully and put it with the photograph of his mother and the 10-pence piece and the smooth grey pebble. And then Harry Potter, Lord of the Silver Nation, age 6, fell asleep in an actual bed, and for the first time in his memory he did not dream about the dark. Chapter 2, The Education of a Lord. The first lesson Fleur ever taught Harry was how to fall. Not metaphorically. Literally, she showed up at the clearing on a Saturday in December, 3 weeks after the delegation, wearing practical clothes instead of the nice coat, and she said, "Stand up," and when he did she hooked her ankle behind his and put him on the ground so fast he didn't register it had happened until he was already looking at the grey sky. "That," she said, looking down at him, "is what happens when you don't know how to fall. You just fall. Now I will show you how to do it properly." Harry sat up and spat out a leaf. "You could have warned me. If I had warned you, you would have tensed up and hurt yourself worse." She offered her hand and pulled him upright with surprising strength for a 10-year-old. "Also, the world will not warn you. So." She was not wrong about any of this, which was something Harry would come to understand as Fleur's particular teaching style. She was almost never wrong, and she was never soft about it, and she was also never cruel about it, and the combination was more effective than anything the Dursleys had ever accidentally taught him through punishment. By the end of that December morning he could fall sideways, fall backward, and absorb a shoulder hit without his head snapping down onto the frozen ground. He was cold and bruised in 3 places and he'd laughed more in 4 hours than he had in the previous month put together. "Again next Saturday," Fleur said, pulling her coat straight. "What are we doing next Saturday?" "I haven't decided yet." She considered him with her head tilted. "You are very small." "I know. You will get bigger. Probably. When you do, the falling will matter more. Right now," she seemed to search for the right word, "right now we are building the foundation. Grandmere says that is the most important part. The foundation. What's the foundation made of?" Fleur looked at him as if she was deciding whether he was asking a real question or a clever one, and then she smiled, a quick, bright, unguarded smile that was completely different from the careful expressions she usually arranged on her face. "Stubbornness," she said. "Mostly stubbornness. The years between 6 and 11 are long when you're living them and very short when you look back." Harry would look back later and understand them as the years when he was built, not born, not prophesied into, but actually built, piece by careful piece, the way you build something you intend to last. The clearing became their place. Not just his and Fleur's. Seraphine came regularly, and Apollon twice a month, and sometimes other Veela whose names Harry learned gradually, who watched him with interest and occasionally tested him in ways that ranged from formal to extremely unexpected. But mostly it was Harry and Fleur, Saturday mornings that ran into Saturday afternoons, and then summer visits to the Delacour estate in the south of France that were so different from Privet Drive that for the first 2 visits Harry spent the initial day simply walking through the house, touching things, making sure it was real. The Delacour estate was not large by some standards. It was large by any standard Harry had reference for. It sat in the hills above a town whose name he couldn't pronounce correctly for 6 months, all pale stone and wide windows and a garden that spilled down the hillside in terraces, fig trees and lavender and a small fountain that ran even in August. The house smelled like warm stone and whatever Apollon was cooking, and underneath everything, very faintly, something that Harry eventually identified as the scent of the clearing, that particular warm aliveness. Apollon Delacour was the first adult who ever fussed over Harry. He didn't know what to do with it, the first summer. She asked if he was hungry. She asked if he was comfortable. She noticed when he finished everything on his plate and added more without making it a thing, without comment, just refilled his plate like this was normal, like feeding a child was simply what you did, and Harry ate the second serving with his eyes slightly bright and his jaw slightly tight, the way you look when something kind catches you unprepared. "She does this with everyone," said Fleur, watching him from across the table. She said it not unkindly, but precisely, letting him know he was not a charity case. "I know," Harry said, which wasn't entirely true, but it helped to say it. Apollon had looked at Harry over her daughter's head with dark eyes that were knowing and warm and said absolutely nothing, which was its own kind of kindness. Magic came in the second year. Not the accidental kind. Harry had been doing accidental magic since before he could walk, the small unconscious eruptions that had made the Dursleys first afraid and then punitive. He'd grown enough control over it that by age 7 he could mostly stop it from happening, which was a kind of discipline but the wrong kind, the kind that came from suppression rather than understanding. What Seraphine began teaching him that second year was the right kind. She taught him first without Fleur, sitting across from him in the clearing with her hands folded in her lap, while Fleur sat 20 feet away pretending to read a book and very clearly eavesdropping. Magic, Seraphine said, her English, when she wanted to use it, was accented and deliberate and perfectly clear, is not a tool. Not for us. Not for you. Harry looked at her. What is it? It is a language. She picked up a fallen birch leaf from the ground and held it up. When you push magic at a thing, you are shouting at it. It may obey. But it will not cooperate. Do you understand the difference? He thought about it. Shouting gets a thing done, he said slowly. Cooperating is, it's like you're doing it together? Seraphine regarded him with that silver-eyed attention. Yes. For Veela, magic is partnership. Not domination. She set the leaf down. You are not Veela. But the grove chose you, and the grove is very old and very particular. I think your magic will work like ours. I think it always has and you have been fighting it. The Dursleys didn't, I know what the Dursleys didn't. Her voice didn't change in temperature but something in it became briefly, precisely cutting. They taught you to hide. I am going to teach you to speak. She reached out and took his hands in hers, turned them palm up, and looked at them for a moment. Close your eyes, she said. Don't push anything. Just, listen. He closed his eyes. He sat in the clearing with the birch trees around them and Fleur's barely audible page turning 20 feet away and Seraphine's cool dry hands around his, and he tried to listen. He felt it before he heard it. A warmth in his chest, not the anxious heat of accidental magic about to escape, but something lower and steadier, something that had been sitting there quietly for years waiting to be acknowledged. It felt like the clearing felt. That inhabited warmth. He opened his eyes. The birch leaf on the ground between them was floating, very slowly, about 3 inches above the soil. Seraphine looked at it. Good, she said. From behind her book, Fleur made no sound whatsoever, which given her usual commentary was impressive. He got a wand on his 9th birthday. Not from Ollivander. Seraphine had opinions about Ollivander, which she expressed in rapid French that Apollon translated with careful diplomatic editing, but the gist was that Ollivander was brilliant and his wands were excellent and his understanding of non-British magical traditions was limited and she was not putting a Veela-lined lord in a wand chosen by someone who'd never heard of silver core work. They went to Lyon. There was a wand maker there named Beaumont, a small precise man in his 70s who spoke to Harry in French that Fleur translated and spent 40 minutes doing nothing but looking at Harry before he even touched a single wand, which Harry initially found odd and then found oddly respectful. He is reading you, Fleur murmured. Reading your magic. He doesn't want to show you anything until he knows what he's looking for. Can he do that? Just read someone's magic? He's been doing it for 50 years. He says, she listened for a moment, he says your magic is like moonlight on water. Which is, a brief pause, that is a very Veela thing for a wizard to be. Beaumont brought out 7 wands, one at a time, with deliberate ceremony. The first 3 did nothing interesting. The 4th threw a shower of silver sparks when Harry picked it up and Beaumont nodded slowly and set it aside. The 5th, 6th, and 7th he put away without having Harry touch them at all. The 4th wand was 11 inches, blackthorn and silver birch laminate, with a core of Veela hair, not taken, Beaumont explained carefully through Fleur, never taken. Offered, freely, by a Veela elder who had brought it to him 20 years ago for exactly this purpose. 20 years ago? Harry said. Fleur translated. Beaumont smiled and said something. He says, Fleur said, looking at Harry with an expression that was trying not to be impressed and not quite managing it, that someone knew you were coming. Harry looked at the wand in his hand. It was warm. Not the warmth of body heat, the warmth of something that had been waiting. Seraphine, he said. Probably, Fleur agreed. He bought the wand. The price, Beaumont indicated, had been paid 20 years ago. Harry didn't argue, because there was something in that, the idea that Seraphine had walked into this shop 2 decades before he was born and paid for his wand, that felt too large to refuse. He walked out of the shop into a lion afternoon with the wand in his pocket, and Fleur fell into step beside him, and they didn't talk about it for a while, just walked through the city with Apollon a comfortable distance behind, and eventually Harry said, "Does it bother you? That she plans things like that? That far ahead?" Fleur was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," she said honestly. "When I was small I thought it was wonderful. Now," she turned it over, "now I think about all the things she has planned that I don't know about yet. And I think that would bother me more if I didn't trust her. But I do trust her. So. That's a complicated answer. You asked a complicated question." They walked. The afternoon sun made the lion streets gold and warm. "I trust her too," Harry said eventually. "Which is strange. I didn't trust anyone before." Fleur glanced at him sideways, brief and assessing. She was 13 now, taller than him still though probably not for much longer, and she had the composed confidence of someone who'd been raised to know her own value. But there were moments, like this one, when the composure opened up and underneath it she was just a person. "It's not strange," she said. "It just means she deserved it." He learned French first, then Latin, then the rudiments of Italian because Apollon said the Italian magical tradition was worth understanding and Fleur would be learning it anyway so they might as well go together. He learned Veela history, which was substantially more interesting than the British magical history he'd later encounter at Hogwarts, partly because it didn't spend 40% of its time on goblin rebellions and partly because Seraphine taught it the way she taught everything, not as a list of events but as a sequence of choices, each one made by a person who had reasons. Why did the nation stay out of Grindelwald's war? Harry asked, age 8, sitting in the garden of the Delacour estate with Fleur's notes spread between them. Seraphine, in her chair, said, "What do you think?" "I think," he looked at the notes, "the official reason is neutrality. Political neutrality. And the real reason?" He thought about it. "The official reason is the real reason. Just not all of it. Grindelwald wanted to use Veela. For their power, for political legitimacy, to say the Silver Nation backed his cause. Staying out wasn't just neutrality. It was refusal. It was refusing to be used." Seraphine was silent for a moment. Then she looked at Fleur and said something in French. Fleur looked faintly smug. "She says you are thinking like a Veela strategist. Is that good?" "It is better than thinking like a British politician," Seraphine said, in her deliberate English, and the dryness in it made Harry laugh. He learned to duel in his 4th year of education, not with a wand first but with his hands. Fleur's uncle Michel came to the estate for a month in the summer Harry was 9, a former Veela guard who was built like something that had been carved from mountain rock and who moved with the economical precision of someone for whom combat had long since stopped being exciting and become simply a skill, like carpentry or cooking. Michel watched Harry fight Fleur for 10 minutes on the first morning. Fleur had been teaching him hand-to-hand since the falling lessons, building on it steadily, and then held up one hand to stop them and said to Fleur, in French, something Harry caught most of, "He's good. But he's fighting like he's trying not to get hit." Fleur had frowned. "Isn't that the point?" "The point," Michel said, "is to win. Those are different things." Harry had understood enough of it to say, in his now serviceable French, "I know." I'm working on it. Michel looked at him for a moment, reassessing. Then he nodded. We work on it together, he said in English. What Michel taught him over that month was something Harry didn't have a word for until later: presence, maybe, or forward intention, the principle that the most dangerous person in a fight is not the most skilled but the one who has already committed to the outcome. You didn't move to avoid being hit. You moved to end it. By the end of the month Harry could hold his own against Michel for about 90 seconds before being put down, which Michel said was genuinely impressive for a 9-year-old. Harry suspected Michel was being generous. He went back to Privet Drive at the end of August and Vernon looked at him. Harry stood in the kitchen doorway and looked back, and something happened in Vernon's face that was new. He didn't reach for the belt. He turned back to his newspaper instead. Harry went upstairs, changed out of his traveling clothes, and sat on his bed with his wand in his hand, turning it over, and felt a new thing settle into his chest alongside the warmth of the magic, a quality of solidity, of ground beneath his feet that nobody had put there for him. He had put it there himself. The Veela education was not only practical. Seraphine spent considerable time on what she called the weight of the title, which in practice meant she told Harry stories. Stories about the previous lords of the nation, not many, 3 in recorded history, each in a different era, and what had happened to them and what mistakes they'd made and what they'd gotten right. She told them without editorializing, without pointing to lessons, just let the story sit. Harry asked questions and she answered them. The first one didn't want it, Harry said once, about the earliest lord. He said no. He walked away from it. And the nation was fine. Yes, Seraphine said. But you chose me anyway. Another potential lord. Yes. Why? If the nation was fine without one? Seraphine looked at him for a long moment. The garden was warm around them, late summer, and Fleur was somewhere in the house, the faint sound of her practicing something on the piano drifting down through an open window. Fine, Seraphine said, is not the same as what we could be. She turned her face toward the garden. The nation has been careful. For a long time. We stay neutral. We stay separate. We protect our own and we do not reach. She was quiet for a moment. I am very old, Harry. I have been careful for a very long time. And I am tired of careful. Harry looked at her. In all the years he'd known her she'd never said anything quite like that, never let the curtain move aside to show something personal underneath. What do you want instead? He asked. She turned back to him. Her silver eyes had something in them that was, he realized, simply hope. Plain and undressed, without strategic implication. I want the nation to stand in the center of the world and not be afraid of it, she said. Harry sat with that. The piano drifted down from the house. I can help with that, he said. I think. I'd like to. Seraphine smiled. She didn't do it often, not widely, not frequently, and it transformed her face into something that showed, briefly, the person she'd been before she was ancient and composed and the Queen Mother of anything. I know you would, she said. I knew when you were 6 years old, sitting in my grove, eating Fleur's cheese, asking what's in it for you. The smile deepened slightly. That is exactly the right question. I knew it then. He met Fleur's sister the summer he was 10. Gabrielle Delacour was 4 years old and she had Fleur's silver blonde hair and enormous dark eyes and absolutely no concept of personal space. She attached herself to Harry on the first morning of his summer visit, took him by the hand, and led him around the garden explaining the names of things in a mixture of French and invented words that Harry mostly followed. He crouched next to her while she showed him a beetle she'd found, and when he said, in French, that it was an excellent beetle, she looked at him with radiant approval. Fleur found them 20 minutes later, both sitting on the garden wall with Gabrielle conducting a very serious investigation into whether beetles could be taught to march. She has adopted you, Fleur said, leaning against the wall. I noticed. She does this with people she approves of. Last year it was the gardener's son. Fleur watched her sister instruct the beetle. He could not get away for 3 weeks. Harry looked at Gabrielle, who was completely absorbed in her beetle, her small face scrunched with concentration. He'd never been around small children. He'd never had affection from small children, or from anyone young, or from anyone in a direction that went toward him rather than away. "I don't mind," he said. Fleur glanced at him. There was something in her expression that was thinking while not appearing to think. "No," she said, after a moment. "I didn't think you would." They sat on the wall in the August sun, Gabrielle and her beetle between them, and didn't say anything else for a while, and that was somehow its own kind of conversation. The Dursleys, over the years, had receded. Not vanished. He still slept in the spare room on Privet Drive, still navigated their particular flavor of cold hostility, still ate meals that were substantially better than they'd been at 6, but still freighted with the Dursley idea that Harry's existence was an imposition. But the Dursleys had become backdrop. The set dressing of his British life, without power over anything that actually mattered to him. Vernon had tried, twice in the early years, to be violently unpleasant. The first time, Harry had stepped back from the raised hand and looked at Vernon with an expression that wasn't fear, wasn't defiance, was simply the flat and complete assessment of someone making a calculation, and Vernon had put his hand down. The second time, Vernon had gotten further. Harry was 8 and Vernon's reach was considerably longer, and what had happened wasn't accidental magic exactly, it was something more directed, a pulse of silver-white light that hit Vernon in the chest and sat him down hard on the kitchen floor. They'd looked at each other, Vernon on the floor and Harry standing over him. "I don't want to hurt you," Harry said. He was 8 and his voice was calm and his wand was in his pocket. "But I will if you make me." He'd gone upstairs. There'd been no third time. Petunia was more complicated. She wasn't kind, she was constitutionally incapable of warmth, or at least incapable of warmth directed at Harry, but she was not stupid, and over the years something had shifted in her manner that wasn't love and wasn't respect but was something in that vicinity. Harry had asked her once, he was 9, what his mother had been like as a child. The question landed on Petunia like something thrown. She went still over the washing up and didn't speak for a full 30 seconds. "Stubborn," she said finally. "Brave in a way that made you want to shake her." She laughed too loud. A pause. "You have her eyes." She went back to the washing up. Harry stood in the kitchen doorway and felt something complicated that he decided not to examine too closely, because it was their first real conversation and he wasn't sure Petunia could survive a second one in quick succession. He wrote to Fleur about it that night. She wrote back 2 days later, "She is a person too, even if she has not always behaved like one. I think that is worth knowing." He thought that was right. The letter arrived on the 2nd of August, a year before his 11th birthday, carried not by owl but by a Veela post bird, a tern, white and silver, that arrived at the Privet Drive window with an authority that the neighborhood pigeons immediately recognized and scattered from. It was addressed in Seraphine's handwriting, and it was longer than her usual correspondence, and it was in English, which meant it was something she wanted him to read without waiting for translation. "My lord," it began, which still made something in Harry's chest do a small complicated thing after 4 years of it. "The Hogwarts letter will arrive in 1 year. I write now because there is something you should know before you enter the British magical world. It will look at you and see its own story. They have been telling that story for 10 years, the boy who lived, the savior, the child weapon they are keeping for when they need him. They will expect you to be that. They will be confused and then upset when you are not. This is not a warning to be careful. You know I do not ask that of you. This is simply information. The world you are walking into has made assumptions about who you are, and those assumptions are wrong, and the process of correcting them will be noisy. Be as noisy as necessary. The nation stands behind you. There is one more thing. Dumbledore will be there. He is not your enemy, I want you to understand this. He is a man who has made choices he believes are right, some of which have been genuinely terrible, and he is not likely to immediately accept that you are not the boy he planned for. Be patient with him if you can. But do not defer to him. You know your own worth now. Hold on to it. Your education here is not finished, it will never be finished, the learning does not stop, but this part is complete. You are ready. I am proud of you. Seraphine. Harry read the letter twice. Then he folded it and added it to the growing collection of Seraphine's letters and Fleur's letters that he kept in the box under the floorboard. The box had gotten bigger over the years, upgraded from a floorboard to an actual lockbox that Apollon had given him, spelled to look like a maths textbook. He sat on his bed in the spare room of number 4, Privet Drive, and thought about Hogwarts. About the British magical world, which he knew about from Seraphine's briefings and Apollon's political analyses and Fleur's commentary, and from the small amount of reading he'd done. Hermione Granger, had she existed in this story, would have recognized the books, but Harry had gotten them earlier and read them with the specific analytical eye of someone who'd been taught to read history as a sequence of choices. He thought about The Boy Who Lived, which was a story he'd been told about himself by people who had never asked him what he thought of it. He thought about what he actually was, a 10-year-old boy who could speak 3 languages, who had been falling correctly for 4 years, who understood Veela political history and basic magical theory and the difference between shouting at magic and speaking with it, who had a wand made of blackthorn and silver birch that had been waiting for him for 20 years. He was, he thought, very ready. He went to his desk. The desk was new, one of the things the Veela delegation had insisted on, and he wrote to Fleur. I got a letter from Seraphine, he wrote. She says the British magical world has made a lot of assumptions about me. I know. I also know they're wrong. I'm not worried about it. Are you busy next Saturday? I think we have 1 more year of clearing lessons before I go and become controversial. We should use it. He sent the letter with the turn, who took it from his hand with the dignified air of something completing an important mission. Then he opened his Charms Theory text, European edition, more comprehensive than the British Standard, and went back to reading, because Seraphine was right that the education never stopped, and because Harry Potter had never in his life been the kind of person who let himself be unprepared. Even at 10. Especially at 10. The last clearing lesson was in July, the summer before Hogwarts. They'd been doing them for almost 5 years. Harry was a few months from 11 and he was nearly Fleur's height now, which she had opinions about and expressed them without being asked, and he could take her in a hand-to-hand bout about 40% of the time, which she had rather fewer opinions about because the 40% had recently become 60% and she was, he suspected, recalibrating. They sat under the silver birch trees after, breathing hard, the summer afternoon warm around them. Seraphine was absent. She had ICW business in Geneva, some political maneuver that Apollon had briefed Harry on with the comfortable assumption that he was following it, which he was. Are you nervous? Fleur asked. She was lying on her back in the grass, looking up at the birch blossoms. No, Harry said. Not even a little. He thought about it honestly. About the lessons and the castle and all of it, no. He paused, about whether people will be strange about you, Fleur supplied. Yes. That. They will be, she said. Extremely strange. About the scar, about the name, about what they've been told. She turned her head to look at him. Does that bother you? Harry looked at the birch blossoms above them, white and impossible and serene. Only if it makes it hard to meet actual people, he said. The ones underneath the strangeness. Fleur was quiet for a moment. Something in the quality of the silence was different from their usual comfortable quiet. You will, she said. You do that. You meet the actual person. She paused. It is probably your best quality. Harry looked at her. She'd gone back to looking at the sky, her silver blonde hair spread in the grass, her profile composed and remote in the way she went when she'd said something she hadn't entirely meant to say. He didn't make anything of it. He was 10 years old and he was learning, alongside everything else, that some things needed time before you could say anything about them. My best quality, he said instead. Better than the hand-to-hand? Fleur didn't move. But the corner of her mouth moved. Do not push your luck, Harry. He laughed. The afternoon sat warm around them, and the birches flowered above, and there were 3 weeks left before the Hogwarts letter arrived, and Harry Potter lay in the grass of the clearing that had found him and felt, completely and without reservation, like himself. Chapter 3, King's Cross. The Hogwarts letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in July, and it was, frankly, underwhelming. Harry turned it over in his hands at the kitchen table. Standard parchment, standard green ink, Mr. H. Potter, the smallest bedroom, 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. He'd been expecting something more significant, not fanfare exactly, but maybe a sense of occasion. Instead it was just a letter, slightly waxy from the owl that had sat on it, smelling of feathers. Petunia stood at the kitchen counter with her back to him, very deliberately not reacting. Harry opened it, read the supply list twice, and went upstairs to write to Apollon about arranging the Diagon Alley trip. He already had most of what he needed, his wand, his core texts in European editions that were better than the British Standard, his robes measured and fitted in Lyon 2 summers ago. But the British editions would be required for class, and there was something he wanted to do in Diagon Alley that had nothing to do with shopping. He wanted to see Gringotts. He wanted to look at what was his. Apollon met him at the Leaky Cauldron on a Thursday, arriving from Paris with Fleur in tow, both of them drawing the particular quality of attention that Veela always drew in crowds, the slightly unfocused staring, the instinctive repositioning of people in their vicinity, the general ambient confusion of people trying to look without appearing to look. Fleur had developed an expression for this. It was not quite a smile and not quite a glare, and it sat very precisely in the gap between the two, communicating I have noticed you noticing and I find it tedious. Harry had been watching her practice it for 2 years and it was now flawless. You look like someone who has no time for nonsense, he told her as they pushed through the pub. I look exactly like what I am, she said. Which is someone who has no time for nonsense. Tom the barman blinked at them 3 times as they passed. Apollon gave him a charming smile that made him walk into a table. The Leaky Cauldron opened onto Diagon Alley through the familiar brick sequence, and Harry stepped into the alley and stopped for a moment, not dramatically, just taking it in. He'd been given descriptions, Seraphine's careful briefings, Apollon's political geography of which shops mattered and why, but the descriptions hadn't quite captured the texture of it, the particular busy aliveness, the smell of something that was everywhere in the alley and nowhere specific, half magic and half London. First impressions? Fleur said at his shoulder. Smaller than I thought, Harry said. Noisier. It is always noisier than you think it will be. She was scanning the alley with the alert eyes of someone cataloguing. Gringotts first. Gringotts first. Gringotts was not smaller than Harry thought. It was exactly as large as a building needed to be to make you feel like it had tolerated your arrival rather than welcomed it. The goblins at the front counters processed customers with the particular efficiency of beings who are both excellent at their jobs and faintly contemptuous of everyone who requires their services. Harry approached the nearest teller. Fleur and Apollon had taken a seat in the waiting area, Apollon handling what she described as a small nation financial matter, and waited until the goblin looked up. Harry Potter, he said. I'd like to access my vault and review the account summary. The goblin looked at him. Goblins' faces were not built for the full range of human expression, but there was something in the angle of this one's head that suggested he'd been expecting a child who didn't know what an account summary was. Identification, the goblin said. Harry put his hand on the counter, palm up, the way Seraphine had showed him. The family magic in a wizard's blood was a form of identification at Gringotts more reliable than any document. The goblin pressed a small bronze disc to his palm, waited a moment, and looked at the result with slightly more attention than he'd been giving it before. Mr. Potter. A note of something not quite deference but in its direction. One moment. The account summary was extensive. Harry sat in a side office with a goblin named Griphook, who seemed to recognize him and had the same quality of recalibrated attention the teller had shown, and went through it with the methodical focus Seraphine had taught him, looking for anything that shouldn't be there. There was quite a lot that shouldn't have been there. Specifically, a standing disbursement of 200 galleons per year to Albus Dumbledore, described as guardianship administration expenses, which had been running since 1981. Harry sat back and looked at this line. "How long has this been running?" he said. "Since the establishment of your guardianship arrangement in November 1981, Griphook said, with the carefully neutral tone of a professional who has strong opinions he is not being paid to share. "I see," Harry said. He filed it. Not with anger, with information, the way Seraphine had taught him to file things that he wasn't ready to act on yet. He authorized a freeze on that specific disbursement, which Griphook processed with a small movement of his expression that might have been satisfaction, and then he reviewed the rest of the summary, asked 3 more questions, and left the side office feeling the particular clarity that comes from knowing things you weren't supposed to know yet. Fleur read his face when he rejoined them in the waiting area. She didn't ask in public. She waited until they were out in the alley, in a gap between a potion ingredients shop and a bookstore, the crowd moving around them. "Something in the vault," she said. It wasn't a question. "Something in the records. I'll tell you later." He looked at the alley. "Books next. I want to see what they're actually teaching." Flourish and Blots was crowded, because it was peak school shopping season, and Harry moved through it with the practiced ease of someone who had been in a lot of bookshops. He picked up the required texts. The standard book of spells grade 1 was significantly less rigorous than what he'd been working from, but he got it, and was standing in the History of Magic section comparing the British edition of A History of Magic against what he already knew when a voice behind him said, "That edition is rubbish, by the way." The 1962 revision missed out 3 entire goblin rebellions. Harry turned around. The girl was approximately his age, with a large quantity of brown hair and an expression of someone who has recently discovered that other people share her opinions on books and is slightly surprised by it. She was holding what appeared to be 5 books simultaneously. "I know," Harry said. "The European edition is better. But the British one is what Binns teaches from, so." The girl's eyes sharpened with interest. "You've already read the European edition?" "Most of it." "Most," she recalibrated rapidly. "I'm Hermione Granger. I'm Muggleborn. I only found out about all of this 2 months ago. I've been trying to read everything before term starts and the amount there is to read is," she stopped herself. "Sorry, that was a lot." "Harry Potter," Harry said. "And no, it wasn't too much. I like people who say things." Hermione Granger looked at him with the expression of someone who has just been told the correct answer and is verifying it from 3 angles simultaneously. Then she looked at his forehead with the instinctive motion that everyone had, the lightning bolt check. "Yes," Harry said, preemptively. "I've read about you," Hermione said. "The books say, well, they say several different things, depending on the author, and some of them are clearly not they're mostly wrong," Harry said. "I'll tell you what's actually true if you want, but probably not in the middle of Flourish and Blots." "September 1st. Hermione said, with the immediate decisiveness of someone who identifies a good plan. "September 1st, Harry agreed. He bought his books. On the way out, he passed a display of Quidditch Through the Ages, picked it up, paid for it, and went to find Fleur, who was outside with Apollon and who looked at the Hermione-shaped interaction he'd just had with the measured approval of someone checking something off a mental list. "You made a friend," she said. "I made a start," Harry said. Platform 9 3/4 was everything the alley had been, concentrated. The Hogwarts Express was an extraordinary thing, red and gleaming and real in a way that made Harry, who was not given to sentiment, feel something genuinely warm for a moment. He stood on the platform with his trunk on the trolley and breathed the steam and the coal smell and let himself, just for a moment, be 11 years old and going somewhere extraordinary. Apollon had come to see him off. She hugged him with a warmth that was entirely genuine and then held him at arm's length and looked at his face with her dark, knowing eyes. "Write to us," she said. "Every week," Harry said. "Write to Fleur." "I write to Fleur more than I write to anyone." Apollon smiled. "Good." She straightened his collar, which didn't need straightening. "You are ready, Harry. More ready than you know." "I think I know," he said. She laughed. "Yes," she said. "You probably do." He found a compartment, stowed his trunk, and was sitting with Quidditch Through the Ages open on his lap when the compartment door slid back and a boy looked in, red-haired, freckled, with a slightly anxious energy and a smear of something on his nose. "Everywhere else is full," the boy said. "Is it all right? Sit down," Harry said. He moved his bag off the other seat. "Harry Potter." The boy sat down with the slightly stunned expression that Harry's name reliably produced. "Ron Weasley," he managed. Then, with the specific restraint of someone trying very hard, "Is that really?" "Yes," Harry said. "The scar." "I know. It's fine." Ron Weasley processed this for about 4 seconds and then seemed to decide, with the instinctive pragmatism of a youngest son, that treating it normally was the only sensible approach. "All right," he said. "Has anything interesting happened yet?" "I fell asleep before we left the platform and I missed the trolley witch." Harry liked him immediately. He'd later understand that this was Ron's specific quality, the ability to be straightforward about what mattered to him, which was not always what people expected to matter, and to not perform anything he didn't feel. For someone coming from years of other people performing things at Harry, it was refreshing in a way he'd have struggled to articulate. Hermione found them 20 minutes later, doing the rounds of compartments looking for a toad that belonged to a round-faced boy named Neville who was doing a very poor impression of not being worried about it. She stopped when she saw Harry, said, "Oh good, you found a seat," which suggested her version of their Flourish and Blotts interaction had been slightly different from his, and then looked at Ron Weasley. "Hermione Granger," she said. "You've got something on your nose." Ron looked at her. Then he wiped his nose, checked his hand, and seemed to decide he liked her too. "Have you found the toad?" Harry asked. "Not yet. It went toward the front of the train." "I'll come," Harry said, because Neville Longbottom's face, visible through the compartment window behind Hermione, was doing something that Harry recognized as the expression of someone trying very hard to be okay and not quite getting there, and Harry had been that expression often enough to want to do something about it when he saw it on someone else. They found the toad 3 compartments down, sitting on a seat with the impervious calm of an animal that has no idea it was lost. Neville held it against his chest with the specific relief of someone whose day has just become significantly better, and he looked at Harry with round eyes that did the scar check, and Harry said, "Yes, I know, don't worry about it," and Neville said, "I wasn't going to say," and Harry said, "You're still welcome," and Neville looked at him for a moment and laughed, surprised into it, the laugh of someone who'd been tense and suddenly wasn't. They went back to the compartment, all 4 of them, and the train moved through the English countryside and they actually talked, about books and magic and Quidditch and the things they were nervous about and the things they weren't, and Harry thought, there they are. The actual people. The castle, when it appeared above the lake in the boat light, was worth every description anyone had ever given it. Harry sat in the boat next to Ron and looked up at Hogwarts and felt the magic of the place, not the Veela warmth of the clearing, something different, older and more institutional, like an extremely powerful being that had been standing in this particular spot for so long it had become the spot, and he understood why Seraphine had said the place mattered. Whatever happened inside it, the castle itself was extraordinary. "Blimey," Ron said, with the eloquence of genuine feeling. "Yes," Harry agreed. McGonagall met them in the entrance hall with the precise command of someone who had been organizing 11-year-olds for 30 years and had no illusions about the process. She was impressive in the way certain people are impressive, not through performance but through accumulated competence, the kind of gravitas you earn rather than claim. Harry filed her as someone worth taking seriously. He was standing in the waiting huddle, Hermione on one side going over her mental list of every known fact about the Sorting Hat, Neville on his other side holding Trevor again with quiet determination, when a drawling voice from somewhere behind him said, "Potter. Harry Potter." Harry turned. The boy was blond and pale and had the particular posture of someone who had grown up being told they were important. He was flanked by two larger boys in the way that people who don't trust their own presence are flanked by larger boys. "That's me," Harry said. "Draco Malfoy." The boy extended his hand with the smooth confidence of someone performing a gesture they'd practiced. "You'll find that some wizarding families are better than others. I can help you, I know who you are," Harry said. Not unkindly, exactly, but plainly, without social lubrication. "Draco Malfoy. Your father is Lucius Malfoy, who is on the Hogwarts Board of Governors and was a Death Eater who claimed Imperius after Voldemort's fall." The entrance hall did something interesting. The children who'd been in earshot made the specific silence of people trying to become furniture. Draco Malfoy's extended hand had frozen in midair. "My father was, I know what your father claims," Harry said. "I'm not interested in your hand, Malfoy. I'm not interested in being helped by you. I appreciate the introduction." He turned back to Hermione and Ron, who were both wearing different versions of the same well-then expression, and said, at a normal volume, "Hermione, which charm do you think they actually use for the sorting?" "Hermione, with commendable adaptability, the hat is a modified legilimency construct, I think. It reads surface intention rather than deep memory, which is why the process is so fast." Behind Harry, Draco Malfoy put his hand down and said nothing else. The Sorting Hat went on Harry's head and was quiet for a long moment. Then it said, inside his head, in a voice that was curious and slightly surprised, "Well. You're not quite what I expected, are you?" "No," Harry agreed silently. "I'm not." "Slytherin would use that mind well," the hat said. "There's ambition in here. Real ambition, not the selfish kind. You want things that matter. And there's cunning enough to, but... No." It paused. "No, that's not quite right for you. What you are is, whatever it is," Harry said, "put me where I'll do the most good." The hat was quiet again. Then it said, almost warmly, "I haven't heard that in 40 years. And then, aloud, "Gryffindor." The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took off the hat, set it on the stool, and walked to the table with the composed ease of someone who had made peace with his own choices before anyone else had weighed in on them. He sat down. Percy Weasley, who had apparently decided to take him under a prefect's wing, started saying things about the house and its history. Harry listened politely. At the other end of the table, the twins, Fred and George Weasley, he'd figure out which was which in approximately 2 days, were grinning at him with the shared expression of people who have just realized the year was going to be more interesting than expected. Ron sat down next to him, having been sorted in with a slightly breathless look of relief. "Had a conversation with it," Ron said, having watched Harry's face during the sorting. "Brief one," Harry said. "What did it say?" "That I'm not what it expected. And I told it to put me where I'd do the most good." Ron looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between impressed and baffled, which Harry was starting to understand was Ron Weasley's natural resting face when confronted with something he hadn't seen before. "Does that just work for you?" Ron said. "That kind of thing?" "Usually," Harry said. "Food's coming, by the way." It was. The Defense Against the Dark Arts professor had a turban. Harry noticed this the way he noticed everything, filed it, gave it weight proportional to what he knew, moved on. The turban was unusual. The stuttering was unusual. The smell around the man was unusual, something that Harry's years in the clearing had made him sensitive to, a wrongness in the magical field around Professor Quirrell, like static, like something underneath the surface of him that wasn't him. He said nothing about this to Ron or Hermione for the first 2 weeks. He waited, and watched, and built the picture carefully. What he knew, Quirrell smelled like dark magic. Quirrell flinched from Harry specifically in a way that wasn't the celebrity flinch most people gave him. Quirrell spent an unusual amount of time on the third-floor corridor, which was out of bounds, which Harry had been told about on day one and had accordingly noted as significant. What he suspected, the third-floor corridor had something in it. The something was being protected. Quirrell's interest in it was not academic. He also knew, from Seraphine's meticulous briefings, that someone had tried to break into Gringotts on the 31st of July, the day he'd turned 11, the day he'd been at King's Cross. Vault 713, which had been emptied that morning. He'd had Griphook's report through Gringotts' formal correspondence, because Harry had asked, and Gringotts told account holders relevant security information if they were the sort of account holders who asked correctly. He wrote to Seraphine about it in October, laying it out clearly: the strange professor, the corridor, the vault, the attempted robbery. He wrote it as an analysis, not a panic. Seraphine wrote back within 3 days. Her letter was short: "Your analysis is correct. The object from Vault 713 is almost certainly in the school. Dumbledore has arranged this deliberately. He is using the school as a secure location, which is his right as headmaster. The question is what Quirrell wants with it and whose interest he is serving. Be careful. Do not confront it alone. You are 11 years old and I will not apologize for saying so." Harry wrote back, "I know. I'm not going to do anything rash. I'm going to talk to Dumbledore." Seraphine's response to this took a week, which suggested she'd had to write several drafts. The final version said, "Good. I am simultaneously proud of you and alarmed that my primary concern is now Dumbledore's ability to handle a direct conversation with you." Harry smiled at that one and pinned it to the inside of his bed curtains. He went to Dumbledore's office on a Thursday evening in November, knocked, and when the gargoyle had moved aside after he gave the password, he'd simply asked McGonagall, who'd looked at him for a long moment and then said it was sherbet lemon, with the expression of someone filing an unusual event for later consideration. He went up. Dumbledore was behind his desk. He was everything Harry had been told: very tall, very old, half-moon spectacles, a beard of remarkable ambition. There were portraits on the walls and instruments on the shelves and a phoenix on a perch that turned its head and looked at Harry with orange eyes full of something that was either wisdom or very committed performance of wisdom. "Harry," Dumbledore said, and his voice was warm and slightly surprised. "I wasn't expecting." "No," Harry agreed, sitting down in the chair across from the desk without being asked. "I wanted to talk about the third-floor corridor." Dumbledore's expression adjusted. 30 years of practice managing student interactions met something that was not a student interaction and recognized it. "That corridor," Dumbledore said carefully, "is out of bounds." "I know. I'm not trying to access it. I want to talk about what's in it, who knows it's in there, and why Professor Quirrell smells like dark magic every time he walks past me." Harry looked at the headmaster steadily. "I also want to talk about the Gringotts vault robbery. Vault 713, which was cleared the same morning your letter arrived. Presumably by you or someone you authorized." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The portraits on the walls were doing the portrait equivalent of pretending not to listen, which meant they were deeply listening. "You are very well informed for an 11-year-old, Dumbledore said. "I've had a good education," Harry said. "Sir." The "sir" was genuine, not performative. Harry respected Dumbledore the way he'd been taught to respect competence even when he was also frustrated by the choices that competence had made. Seraphine had been very clear about this distinction. Dumbledore looked at him across the desk with those famously penetrating blue eyes, and Harry looked back, and something passed between them that was a negotiation and both of them knew it. "The object is safe," Dumbledore said. "The corridor's protections are sufficient." "Against most things," Harry said. "Are they sufficient against a possessed teacher?" A pause. The phoenix shifted on its perch. "You believe Quirrell is possessed," Dumbledore said. "I believe something is wrong with him that's more than nervous energy. I believe it involves Voldemort." Harry watched Dumbledore's face at the name. Most people flinched. Dumbledore simply settled slightly, like a wall absorbing a push. I think you know this. I think you're using the corridor as a trap and Quirrell as the mechanism. I think you're waiting for him to try. The clock on the desk ticked. If I were doing something like that, Dumbledore said, very carefully, it would be because I believed I had the situation in hand. You probably do, Harry said. But I wanted you to know that I know. Not because I'm going to interfere. Because, he thought about how Seraphine had said this, because real protection explains itself. If you're keeping something dangerous in a building full of children, the people who might get caught in it deserve to be told that there's a reason. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Seraphine Delacour has taught you to argue very effectively, he said. She taught me to think clearly, Harry said. The arguing is just what happens after. Something shifted in Dumbledore's expression then, something private and complicated that Harry filed carefully. It was the look, he thought, of someone encountering a future they hadn't fully prepared for and trying to determine whether it was the right future or simply a different one. I will tell you this, Dumbledore said at last. What is in that corridor is a target. The person who wants it, who wears Professor Quirrell as a vehicle, intends to use it to return to full power. The corridor's protections are designed to require certain qualities in the person who passes through them. Qualities that Tom Riddle does not possess. A pause. Some of those qualities, Harry, are yours. So it ends with me anyway, Harry said. I rather suspect it does, Dumbledore said. Though I confess I was not expecting you to come and have this conversation with me. What were you expecting? A braver or more impulsive version, Dumbledore said, and there was something rueful in it. I underestimated, I think, what 4 years with Seraphine produces. She'd say you underestimated what 4 years with Seraphine and Fleur produces, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him a moment longer, and then, genuinely, he smiled. Yes, he said. I expect she would. It happened in December, the night before the Christmas holidays. Harry had known it was coming. Quirrell's smell had gotten worse over the preceding week, the static of dark magic around him thickening towards something that felt like desperation, and Harry had told Ron and Hermione and Neville to stay on their corridor on Thursday evening, and all 3 of them had asked approximately 0 questions and done exactly that, which said something good about all of them. He went through the 3rd-floor corridor alone. Not because he was reckless. Because he was the only one with the specific magical signature needed to pass the final protection. He'd worked this out from Dumbledore's half-explanation and 3 weeks of thinking about it, the Veela-lined magic, the silver birch wand, the quality of soul mark that the Grove had recognized at 6 years old. Some doors only opened for particular keys. He went through the devil's snare by speaking to it, not the lumos that would have worked, something quieter and more fundamental, his magic going out toward the plant like a conversation rather than a command, and the plant released him and he dropped through. He caught the winged key on the 2nd pass because he'd been playing pickup Quidditch in the hills behind the Delacour estate since he was 8 and his hands knew what to do before his brain had finished directing them. He walked the chess board and told the pieces which moves to make, thinking 3 steps ahead the way Seraphine had played chess against him every week for 4 years, and the pieces moved and the path opened and he walked through the carnage of it without breaking stride. The mirror room was the last one. Quirrell stood in front of the mirror of Ariste and was arguing with himself in a way that confirmed everything Harry had suspected, the turban half unraveled, the voice coming from the back of his head inhuman and cold, and the face in the back of the turban was something Harry couldn't look at directly and didn't need to. You, said the voice on the back of Quirrell's head. Potter. Yes, Harry said. You are, not afraid. Something like real interest in the cold voice. Children are afraid. You should be afraid. I know what you are, Harry said. He was standing 10 feet from the mirror, wand in his hand but not raised. You're what's left of Tom Riddle. You're losing your grip on Quirrell, I can smell it from here, the magic coming apart. You need the stone because without it you have maybe weeks before you lose him entirely and you're left as this. The interest in the voice deepened, and underneath it was something else, calculation, the specific calculation of a very old predator assessing something unexpected. The stone, Riddle said. Yes. And you are going to get it for me. No, Harry said pleasantly. Look in the mirror, boy. You will see your desire. And your desire is not the stone, Harry said. I don't want the stone. I have no use for the philosopher's stone. I'm 11 and I'm not planning to die anytime soon. He looked at the mirror. It showed him nothing dramatic. The clearing, in flower. Fleur sitting in the grass. Apollon at a table. Seraphine in her chair. The people who were his. Not objects. Not power. Just that. The mirror, because it was designed to be tricked by people whose desire was the stone but who weren't greedy enough to want to use it, put the stone in his pocket anyway, because that was how Dumbledore had built it and it was a rather clever piece of magic. Harry felt the weight of it in his pocket. Riddle felt it too. Give it to me. No, Harry said. What followed was not a long fight. Quirrell lunged and Harry sidestepped with 4 years of Michelle's training in his legs and put his hand on Quirrell's wrist and held it, and the burning that went through his palms, Lily Potter's sacrificial magic activated by proximity to Riddle's vessel, went through Quirrell's wrist and up his arm and Quirrell made a sound that was terrible and brief. Harry let go immediately. His hands hurt, badly. He watched Quirrell fall. The face on the back of the turban screamed, a sound like something tearing, and the room went cold and dark and Harry stood in the center of it with his aching hands and watched Voldemort, what was left of him, scatter into nothing. He was still standing there when Dumbledore came through the door. The headmaster looked at the unconscious Quirrell, at Harry's burned hands, at the stone Harry was already holding out to him. Here, Harry said. You should probably destroy it. Dumbledore took it. He looked at Harry with those blue eyes and said nothing for a moment. Are you hurt? Hands, Harry said. Burns. I've had worse from training. Another pause. I should not have let you come down here alone. You didn't let me, Harry said. I decided to. There's a difference. He put his wand away. Also, I'm fine. Quirrell is less fine. You should check on him. Dumbledore moved toward Quirrell, and Harry leaned against the wall and cradled his burned hands against his chest and looked at the mirror of Ariste, which still showed the clearing, still showed the people. He thought, I need to write to Seraphine tonight. He thought, Fleur is going to say I told you so about the hands. She did, when he wrote to her from the hospital wing. Her letter came back the next morning, I told you. You should have worn gloves. Also, I am very glad you are all right. Don't tell Grandmere I said that first or she will think I have become sentimental. Harry read it twice and smiled at the ceiling of the hospital wing. Hermione visited at lunch and brought biscuits and sat on the foot of his bed and said, I want to hear everything. Start from the devil's snare. Ron came at dinner and said, was it brilliant? And then, before Harry could answer, it was brilliant, wasn't it? You absolute menace. Neville came with them both and didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at Harry with his round face doing something complicated and earnest, and then said, thank you. For telling us to stay inside. You knew it was dangerous. I knew it might be, Harry said. You were trying to keep us out of it. Trying, yes. Harry looked at the three of them. I should have told you more. I should have told you what I knew. You deserve to know. He meant it. He'd been turning this over from his first hour in the hospital wing, not that he'd gone alone, the alone part had been necessary, but that he'd kept the shape of the situation from people who were his friends and who could have decided for themselves what to do with the information. He filed it. Made himself a note, internally. Seraphine tells her people what they need to know. That's the difference. Ron, who processed emotional moments by moving through them quickly into practical territory, said, right, well, next time tell us. We'll stay inside if we're supposed to stay inside, but we'd like to know why. He paused. Also, Hermione's been developing a theory about the stone since October and she's furious she didn't get to test it. I'm not furious, Hermione said. You're a little furious, Neville said, with the precise accuracy of someone who doesn't usually say things out loud. Hermione pressed her lips together and did not deny it. Harry looked at the three of them, Ron's easy grin, Hermione's compressed outrage, Neville's quiet earnestness, and thought of Fleur telling him he met the actual people. The people underneath the strangeness. Next time, he promised them. You'll know everything. Outside the hospital wing windows, the first snow of the year was coming down on the Hogwarts grounds, and the castle was quiet around them, and Harry Potter, 11 years old and fully himself, put his aching hands behind his head and felt, for the second time in his life, like the future was a room he was walking into rather than a thing that was happening to him. Chapter 4, The Nation Moves. The summer between first and second year was the summer Harry grew 3 inches and developed opinions about politics. The 3 inches happened gradually, the way these things do, and Fleur commented on it with the detached interest of a scientist noting a result. Finally, she said, the first morning of his July visit, looking him up and down in the doorway of the Delacour estate. You were very small for a very long time. I was malnourished for the first 6 years, Harry said. I'm making up for it. You are making up for it aggressively. She stepped aside to let him in. Come eat breakfast. Maman has made enough for several people. The opinions about politics happened less gradually. Seraphine had been escalating his political education since January, since the night in the hospital wing, actually, because the moment Harry had handed Dumbledore the Philosopher's Stone and said you should probably destroy it, something in Seraphine's assessment of the timeline had shifted and her letters had started arriving with briefing documents attached. The briefing documents were dense, specific, and treated him like an adult who could determine what was relevant, which he appreciated enormously. The picture they painted was this: the British magical world was not ready for Voldemort's return, and it was not ready in a specific way. Institutionally, structurally, it had spent 10 years telling itself the problem was solved and had built an entire mythology around the 11-year-old who had solved it, and that mythology was both a political tool and a cognitive trap. The Ministry of Magic under Cornelius Fudge was reactive, status-conscious, and deeply invested in not having to do anything difficult. The ICW, the International Confederation of Wizards, which was the closest thing the magical world had to a global body, was similarly invested in stability, but for different reasons. The Veela Nation held observer status at the ICW, which meant Seraphine had a seat at the table and a clear view of every piece of information the Confederation chose to process, ignore, or misrepresent. She was processing, noting, and writing it all in those briefing documents, and she sent them to Harry with the implicit instruction, understand what is coming before it comes. He read them in the garden of the Delacour estate in the mornings, while Apollon brought coffee and Gabrielle, now 6, conducted an ongoing investigation into whether the estate's cat could be trained to perform simple tasks. By August he had a fairly complete picture of the political landscape, a growing certainty about what Lucius Malfoy's position on the Hogwarts Board of Governors actually meant, and a very specific concern about something Seraphine had mentioned in passing in her July letter. The diary, he said to Seraphine one afternoon, sitting across from her in the garden. She was in her chair. She was always in her chair, in that garden, in that particular afternoon light, immovable as the stone wall behind her. You mentioned Riddle's diary. In the context of artifacts that might have survived him. Yes, Seraphine said. Do you know where it is? A pause. I have a suspicion. Lucius Malfoy. Another pause, this one with a quality to it that was not exactly surprise but was something adjacent, the slight recalibration of someone whose estimate has been confirmed ahead of schedule. How? She said. Process of reasoning, Harry said. Riddle made artifacts to preserve himself, the stone was an attempt to recover fully, but before that attempt he must have had contingencies. Objects that held pieces of him, that could be activated when conditions were right. Lucius Malfoy was one of his closest lieutenants. He has a son about to enter Hogwarts and a wife who has very few illusions about what her husband does and has made specific choices about what to overlook. He looked at Seraphine. And Malfoy's been on the Hogwarts board all year, positioning himself. Not just general influence, something specific. Something he wanted access to. Seraphine was quiet for a long moment. "You have been thinking about this since winter," she said. "Since October," Harry said. Before Quirrell showed himself. It felt like, set up. Like there were multiple pieces moving. Seraphine looked at him across the garden, her silver eyes doing what they did, which was to see through everything performative down to the structure underneath. "You are right," she said. "I believe the diary is with Malfoy. I believe he intends to use it, not on Voldemort's behalf, precisely. On his own behalf, with Voldemort as the mechanism." She folded her hands in her lap. Lucius Malfoy is not a true believer. He is an opportunist. The diary is a weapon he intends to deploy at precisely the right moment, in precisely the right environment, to achieve something specific. "Discrediting the school," Harry said. "The board." "More than that," Seraphine said. "The nation." Harry went still. "The nation has filed for full membership status at the ICW," Seraphine said. "Not observer status. Full membership, with a seat and a vote and the formal recognition that the Veela are a sovereign magical people rather than a category of being." Her voice was completely even, but underneath it was something that had the density of years. "This has been the work of my life, Harry. This application. The British contingent at the ICW has been the primary opposition. They have objected on the grounds that the Veela are not a sufficiently organized governance structure. And the Lord of the Silver Nation," Harry said slowly, walking around at Hogwarts, associated with the Veela through his known visits to France, associated by Malfoy's framing with whatever disaster Malfoy is planning, would be a gift to every British delegate who wants to vote no, Seraphine said. "Yes." They looked at each other across the garden. "Tell me everything you know about the diary," Harry said. Second year started on a note of minor chaos that had nothing to do with Lucius Malfoy. Fred and George Weasley had developed, over summer, an itch powder that activated when exposed to Peeves, specifically, and only Peeves, because they had spent 3 weeks attempting to isolate the particular magical frequency of poltergeist-level mischief from regular ambient castle magic, and they had apparently succeeded, and the resulting incident in the entrance hall on September the 1st involved Peeves, 14 suits of armor, and a sound that Filch described later as like the inside of a very bad decision. Harry arrived through the barrier to find Ron crying with laughter on the platform and Hermione looking between disapproval and helpless amusement with the expression of someone who has long since accepted that these are her people. "How bad?" Harry said. "The armor is fine," Hermione said. "Peeves is very itchy," Ron managed. Neville was on the train already, saving compartments with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned to be useful as a way of belonging. He'd had a good summer, his grandmother had let him work in his greenhouse every morning, and he discovered that he could coax things from soil that his books said weren't possible at his level, which Neville described with the specific intensity of someone who has found the thing they were always supposed to do. Harry sat with the three of them and felt the ease of people who've been through something together. Not a forced camaraderie, just the natural gravity of people who'd chosen each other and kept choosing. "Second year," Ron said, as the train moved. "We know more, we're slightly larger, and apparently the girl who hexed 4 Ravenclaws over a library book last June is coming back, so that's, I did not hex anyone," Hermione said. "I applied a Jellylegs jinx in self-defense after they physically took the book out of my hands." "Right, we definitely know more." Harry was quiet, watching the countryside. He was thinking about the diary. He'd asked Seraphine for everything she knew, and she'd given him a slim briefing document that told him what it was, a Horcrux, though she used the older French term, un fragment d'âme, a soul fragment, and what it could do and what activating it required. A victim. Parseltongue or a conduit for one. And a target that would cause maximum damage to both Hogwarts as an institution and to whatever Dumbledore considered his strongest alliances. The Chamber of Secrets. Seraphine had found the reference in Veela historical records, a mention of Salazar Slytherin's hidden construction, during research she'd done in the summer. She'd flagged it with the careful notation of someone who has put several pieces together and doesn't like the picture. Harry had written back, "Don't tell Dumbledore yet. I want to know more about how Malfoy intends to deploy it. If we move on Malfoy too early, he hides it and we've lost the chance to catch him doing something that can be used publicly." Seraphine had written, "You are 12 years old." Harry had written, "I know. Is my reasoning wrong?" A pause of 4 days, which in Seraphine terms was significant deliberation. Then, "No. But we watch carefully. The moment anyone is genuinely endangered, we act." Agreed? Agreed, Harry had written. The diary appeared in Ginny Weasley's cauldron at Flourish and Blots, planted there by Lucius Malfoy's hand while he was making a scene about Hermione's parentage with the practiced distaste of someone who'd made this kind of scene before and found it effective. Harry was in the shop. He saw it happen. Not the planting, that was done while the crowd was focused on Malfoy's confrontation with Arthur Weasley, two fathers going at each other with the specific energy of men who've been circling this argument for years. But he saw Malfoy crouch beside Ginny, who was small and red-haired and clutching her used books with slightly pink cheeks, and he saw Malfoy straighten again, and he saw the quality of Malfoy's expression, satisfied, in the specific way of someone who has just set something in motion. Harry crossed the shop in 4 steps and crouched beside Ginny. "Let me see your cauldron," he said quietly. Ginny looked at him with enormous brown eyes. "What?" "Malfoy just put something in it." "May I look?" She blinked, then held it out. Harry looked inside, and there it was, a small black diary, T.M. Riddle embossed on the cover, looking like exactly what it was and nothing at all like what it was simultaneously. He didn't touch it. He straightened and looked across the shop to where Malfoy was finishing his performance with the cold composure of someone who had already moved on from it in his head. Harry looked at him. Malfoy looked back, and something shifted in Malfoy's face, not fear, he didn't fear 11-year-olds, not even this one, but recalibration. The specific recalibration of someone who has just noticed that the variable they thought was inert is watching them. "Keep it safe," Harry told Ginny quietly. "Don't write in it. Don't let anyone write in it. And tell me if anyone asks you about it." Ginny, who had a good instinct for when adults, or near adults, were serious, nodded once. Malfoy left the shop. Harry stood in Flourish and Blots and thought about chess. He let it run through September and October. Not passively, he checked in with Ginny every week, casually, in the way that first years appreciate being checked in on by second years without it being made a formal thing. Ginny Weasley was sharp and brave and had the Weasley quality of absolute loyalty, and she'd kept the diary in her trunk and not written in it and had reported, in mid-October with slightly wide eyes, that a boy had asked her about it. An older Slytherin, she didn't know his name, who'd said he'd heard she'd found something interesting. "What did you tell him?" Harry asked. "I said I found a used diary and it was boring," Ginny said. "Good." Harry thought. "Lock your trunk. And if anything happens to make you feel strange, like someone's been in your head, tell me immediately." Ginny looked at him with those brown eyes. "Harry. What is it?" "I'll tell you when I know more," he said, which was a version of the promise he'd made to Ron and Hermione after the Philosopher's Stone business. "But you're safe. I promise you're safe." She didn't look fully convinced, but she trusted him, which was its own weight. He wrote to Seraphine that night, "Malfoy is using a proxy. Slytherin student, unknown. The diary is secure but the activation attempt has begun. I need to find the chamber before Malfoy finds a different approach. Seraphine, Apollon has located a reference in the European Magical Archives. The chamber entrance is somewhere in the castle's lower structure. Plumbing. Look at the oldest sections. Also, the ICW vote has been scheduled for December. Malfoy knows this. His timeline is not academic. Harry stared at that last line for a while. His timeline is not academic. He went to Hermione. The conversation with Hermione happened in the library, because the library was where conversations with Hermione happened, always, and it had the advantage of being full of things she could pick up and reference mid-sentence. Harry laid it out for her completely this time. All of it, the diary, what it was, what it could do, Malfoy's involvement, the chamber, the ICW vote, Seraphine's analysis, his own. Hermione listened with her elbows on the table and her hands pressed together in front of her face in the thinking posture he'd come to know as her signal for this is serious and I am processing it at full capacity. When he finished she was quiet for a moment. The polyjuice potion, she said. What? If we need to find out which Slytherin is Malfoy's proxy, and we do, because that's the person who knows how the diary is meant to be deployed, we need information from inside Slytherin house. Polyjuice potion. She was already reaching for a book. It takes a month to brew. I'll start tonight. Harry thought about it. That's actually excellent. I know. She found the page. Also, the Parseltongue. You haven't mentioned it but it's in the chamber's history and it matters. Can you? Yes, Harry said. Hermione looked up from the book. This was, he realized, the first time he'd confirmed it to someone at Hogwarts. He'd told Seraphine 2 years ago, who'd been entirely unsurprised, and Fleur knew, and Apollon knew, but within the British magical world Parseltongue carried the specific weight of a century's worth of dark associations. Right, Hermione said. She absorbed it, filed it, moved on. Then you can open the chamber and close it. Which means this is actually manageable. She pulled out her notes. What do you need from me? Harry looked at her for a moment. Exactly this, he said. Exactly what you're already doing. Ron, when told, said, Polyjuice potion. That's brilliant and also very illegal. Which part matters more to you? Hermione asked, in the tone of someone who already knew the answer. Ron looked at the ceiling. The brilliant part, he admitted. Obviously. Neville said, tell me how to help. Then, when everyone looked at him, I can do things. I grow things. The Polyjuice potion ingredients, 3 of them, Hermione said, looking at her list with sudden recalibration. You could grow 3 of them, actually. Fresh is better than stored. Neville straightened slightly. Done, he said. They found the chamber entrance in November. Harry had been working the plumbing hypothesis for 3 weeks, walking the older corridors with his attention on the water sounds under the stone, not with his ears exactly, but with the same extended awareness Seraphine had built in him, the magic listening instead of shouting. He found it on a Tuesday, in the girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor, currently uninhabited because of the ghost who lived there, a weeping presence called Moaning Myrtle who had strong feelings about being interrupted in what she appeared to consider her personal bathroom. The sink with the snake engraving. Harry looked at it for a long moment, and then he spoke to it quietly, in the sliding hiss that was Parseltongue and that he'd always associated with the particular warmth of the clearing, and the sink moved, and the pipe yawned open beneath. He stood over it and looked down into the dark. He didn't go in. Not yet. He needed to know more about what was down there, and he needed to be certain about Malfoy's proxy, and the Polyjuice potion wasn't ready. He put the sink back and stood in the bathroom in the November afternoon and thought. Myrtle, who had been observing from a cubicle, drifted out and looked at him with large, spectral eyes. You speak snake, she said. Yes, Harry said. I saw the last person who opened that, she said. 50 years ago. I was here when they opened it. She stopped. I died that night. Harry turned and looked at her properly. She had the washed-out appearance of all ghosts and the specific expression of someone carrying something very old and very heavy. "What did they look like?" he said. "The person who opened it." "A boy," Myrtle said. "Dark hair." "He looked sad, but he wasn't. He was cold. Underneath." She looked at the sink. "He wrote in a book. After." "Did you see the book?" "Black. Old-looking." She met his eyes. "You know what it is?" "Yes," Harry said. "You're going to stop it?" "Yes," Harry said again. Myrtle looked at him for a long moment with those pale eyes. "Good," she said, with the quiet conviction of someone who has been waiting 50 years to say it and means every word. The Polyjuice operation in December was, by any objective measure, exceptional work for 12-year-olds. The proxy was Blaise Zabini, who was clever and careful and had the specific quality of someone doing a job rather than acting on belief, which confirmed Seraphine's analysis that Malfoy had chosen a mercenary rather than a zealot, because zealots were unpredictable and Malfoy was not the kind of man who liked unpredictable things. Zabini, as Crabbe, told Hermione as Millicent Bulstrode that the diary was meant to be activated in the chamber during the Christmas holidays when the school was at reduced population. That the monster it called would attack Muggle-born students. That the goal was to force Dumbledore's removal from Hogwarts, specifically timed to land before the December ICW vote, as a piece of evidence that Hogwarts and by extension the British magical establishment could not maintain a safe institution, and that the Veela Nation's application for full ICW membership was being associated by the British delegation with Harry Potter specifically. "They're saying you're a Veela puppet," Hermione reported, having gotten more out of Zabini than she'd expected because Zabini was apparently not above boasting in the right company. "That's the framing Malfoy's pushing to the British ICW delegates. That the boy who lived is being controlled by a foreign non-human faction." Harry sat with this for a moment. "Right," he said. "Right?" Ron said. "They've just given me the exact argument I need," Harry said. "If I let Malfoy deploy the diary, the story writes itself in his direction. If I intercept it correctly, publicly, the story writes itself in ours." "That's very cold," Ron said, admiringly. "Seraphine has been teaching me politics since I was 8, Harry said. "This is basic." "What do we do?" Neville said. Harry thought about it carefully. "The chess board of it. Then, we let Malfoy think it's working. We let him get to the point where he's committed to the move, where he's already told the ICW delegates what's coming, where pulling back would be visible. Then we shut it down completely. With witnesses." "Who witnesses it?" Hermione said. "Dumbledore. McGonagall. And," he looked at the three of them, "someone from the ICW. Seraphine can arrange that. A neutral delegate who can report what they saw." Hermione looked at him with the expression she got when a plan exceeded her expectations. "That's actually, don't," Ron said. "You'll encourage him." "Good," Harry said. "He needs encouraging." He wrote to Seraphine that night with the full plan. Her response arrived the following morning with a postscript in French that he'd been reading long enough to translate without effort. "I have arranged for a Swiss delegate, Madame Fontaine, to be present at the school on the 19th. She is neutral on the British Veela question and she is known for her integrity. Also, I have spoken to Dumbledore." He hadn't asked her to speak to Dumbledore. He read the line twice, then wrote back, "What did you tell him?" "That you were managing something he should know about but not interfere with." He asked several questions. I answered the ones I chose to answer. How did he take that? Better than I expected. He is learning. A pause in the letter that felt like a pause, a line break. He asked about you. About how you are. I told him you are excellent and that he should ask you himself. Did he? He sent you something. Check the Owl Post tomorrow. The Owl Post brought a small package and a note. The note was brief and Dumbledore's handwriting was exactly what Harry had expected, looping, slightly theatrical, entirely deliberate. Harry, I find I owe you several conversations I haven't had yet. I hope the enclosed is a small beginning. A.D. The package contained a bar of Honeydukes chocolate and a book on advanced transfiguration theory that was not on any Hogwarts curriculum because it was too difficult for students under 5th year. Harry looked at both of them for a long moment. He wrote a short note back, "Thank you for the chocolate. The book is excellent. I'd like those conversations when you're ready." He sent it with the school owl and felt something settle slightly, not resolution, nothing that simple, but the beginning of something that was actually honest between them, which was better than the alternatives. On the 19th of December, Harry opened the Chamber of Secrets. Not alone this time. Dumbledore was there. McGonagall was there. Madame Fontaine, the Swiss ICW delegate, was there, with the composed watchfulness of a woman whose entire professional value was in what she observed and reported accurately. Lucius Malfoy was not there, but his proxy Zabini was, having been told by a message he believed came from Malfoy that the timing had been moved to the 19th. It had not come from Malfoy. Harry looked at Zabini across the girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor, and Zabini looked back with the calculating expression of someone rapidly revising their understanding of events. "I'd like the diary," Harry said. Zabini looked at the assembled teachers and Madame Fontaine. He was, Harry thought, genuinely smart enough to know that this particular moment had tipped definitively out of his control, and smart enough to be calculating what the best available option was. He held out the diary. Harry took it with a cloth, he didn't touch it directly, and held it up so Madame Fontaine could see the cover. T.M. Riddle, he said. Tom Marvolo Riddle. Voldemort's real name. This is a soul fragment, specifically, a fragment from the man who murdered my parents. He looked at Fontaine directly. It was planted in the possession of a first-year student at this school by Lucius Malfoy at Flourish and Blotts in August. I have a witness to the planting. It was meant to open the Chamber of Secrets and direct a creature against students here. Timed specifically to coincide with the ICW vote on the Veela Nation's membership application. Fontaine had been writing since he started talking. She looked up. You are making a serious allegation regarding Lucius Malfoy. Yes, Harry said. I have documentation. Fleur Delacour will provide it formally to the ICW through the proper channels. He looked at Dumbledore, who was watching him with the expression he'd developed, not the surprised expression anymore, something more settled and more complicated. Professor Dumbledore can confirm the chamber and the diary. The chamber can be sealed permanently. He held up the diary. With your permission, Professor? Dumbledore looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at the diary with his blue eyes and something in his expression was old and private and done with it. Yes, he said. By all means. Harry had a basilisk fong in his coat pocket, sourced, with remarkable practicality, by Seraphine from the European Magical Artifacts Registry, where basilisk venom extracts were catalogued, and he drove it through the diary with a completeness that made Hermione, watching from the doorway where she and Ron and Neville had been told to wait, make a sharp satisfied sound. The diary screamed. Ink poured from it like blood. The cold presence that had been sitting inside it, not Voldemort fully, not anything that close to him yet, but something of him, dissipated like smoke in wind. Zabini left with McGonagall and Madame Fontaine and said nothing on the way out except, once, quietly, something that Harry thought was, I didn't know what it actually was, which might even have been true. The chamber entrance sat open in the bathroom floor. Harry looked at Dumbledore. Do you want to see it? Harry said. I think, Dumbledore said, that I do. They went down together, not speaking much, Dumbledore's wand lit and Harry navigating by the Parseltongue sense of the place. The chamber itself was extraordinary and terrible, the enormous stone face of Salazar Slytherin at the far end, the bones of 1,000 years, the smell of deep water and old magic that had gone wrong somewhere and never recovered. The basilisk was dead. Had been dead for 50 years, since whatever had happened with the last boy who'd opened this place. It lay along the chamber floor, vast and skeletal, and Harry walked along its length with his hands in his pockets and thought about Riddle, who had built this, and what a terrible waste it all was. Parseltongue is not a dark gift, Dumbledore said, behind him. Not a question. No, Harry said. It's a language. Languages aren't dark. A pause. I have spent some years suggesting otherwise to students who found it frightening. I know. Harry turned to look at him. I think that was wrong, with respect. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment, looking at the chamber, at the bones, at the ancient terrible architecture of someone's vision of purity. Yes, he said. I think it probably was. They sealed the chamber from the inside, Harry speaking the closing sequence into the carved stone wall, and the entrance above sealed itself with the sound of something old and final clicking shut. The ICW vote happened on the 22nd of December. Harry wasn't there, he was at the Delacour estate, because Apollon had pulled him out of Hogwarts 3 days before the holidays officially started on the grounds that she wasn't waiting a moment longer, and Dumbledore had, surprisingly, said this was fine. He was in the garden with Gabrielle when Seraphine came out of the house. He read it in her face before she said anything. Not the relief he expected, something larger, something that had been held back for a very long time and was now very carefully not being let all the way out at once, because some things break if you release them too fast. The vote, he said. Seraphine sat down in her garden chair, which someone had brought outside in the December chill, and looked at the pale winter sky. Full membership, she said. 17-9. A pause. The Malfoy situation was brought to the floor by Fontaine's formal report. The British delegation had nothing to say about it that didn't make them look worse. Another pause. Lucius Malfoy has been summoned to a formal hearing in January. Harry sat down on the garden wall. Gabrielle climbed up next to him and leaned against his arm, looking at Seraphine with the clear attention of a child who knows something important has happened. 17-9, Harry said. Yes. You said it would be closer than that. I was wrong, Seraphine said, and said it with the ease of someone who had made peace with being occasionally wrong decades ago. The combination of Fontaine's report and the diary evidence shifted 3 votes I had assessed as uncertain. She turned to look at Harry. You shifted them. Your conduct, the documentation, the timing, going to Fontaine directly rather than acting unilaterally, it demonstrated exactly the quality of judgment that the opposition was claiming you didn't have. Harry thought about this. I just did what made sense. Seraphine looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said. That is precisely what I mean. Fleur appeared in the doorway of the house, having apparently been inside with Apollon for the phone call from Geneva. She looked at Harry sitting on the wall with Gabrielle leaning against him, and she looked at Seraphine in her chair, and her face did its thing, the composed exterior opening briefly, and underneath it something warm and unguarded. She crossed the garden and sat on Seraphine's other side and didn't say anything, just sat with her. Seraphine reached out and put one hand briefly on Fleur's knee. A gesture so small and so complete that Harry looked away from it, not because it was private exactly, but because some things deserved their own space. Gabrielle, who had no such compunctions, said, "Did we win?" "Yes," Harry said. "We won." She nodded with the profound satisfaction of someone who considers any outcome involving her family to be correct by definition, and then jumped off the wall and ran back toward the house, presumably to tell the cat. Harry sat in the winter garden and felt the particular quality of this moment, not triumph exactly, something quieter and more lasting. The sense of something having shifted in the world that couldn't shift back. Fleur looked across at him from Seraphine's other side, and she said, quietly enough that it was nearly private, "You know Malfoy won't just stop." "No," Harry agreed. He won't. What do you think he does next? Harry looked at the pale December sky, the bare fruit trees of the estate's garden, the light on the hills above the town. He'll find something else to hold, Harry said. Something he can use when Voldemort actually comes back. Not a plan, a position. He's not a true believer, but he's also not going to be on the losing side if he can help it. He thought about the chessboard of it. When Voldemort returns, Malfoy will offer himself as an asset. He'll make himself too useful to punish for the diary. And in the meantime, he'll try to make everything as difficult as possible through legitimate channels. He won't succeed, Fleur said. Not permanently, Harry said. But it'll be noisy. She looked at him with those grey-blue eyes and said nothing for a moment. I'll be at Hogwarts next year, she said. For the tournament. Harry looked at her. Triwizard? Beauxbatons is entering, she said, with the careful neutrality of someone who has opinions about this that they haven't fully decided to share yet. I've been asked to be a champion. Have you decided? She turned her face toward the garden. Her profile was composed and remote in the way that meant she was thinking hard about something she hadn't resolved. Almost, she said. Harry nodded. He didn't push. He'd learned, over 4 years of knowing Fleur Delacour, that almost always became yes when she'd finished thinking it through, and that the thinking through was hers to do. The winter afternoon settled around the garden. The hills above the town caught the last of the pale sunlight. Inside the house, Apollon was on the phone with Geneva, and Gabrielle was explaining something elaborate to the cat, and the Veela Nation was a full member of the ICW for the first time in its history. Harry sat with that for a while. It was enough for 1 year. Chapter 5, The Triwizard Fire. The summer before 4th year, Harry kissed Fleur Delacour by accident. Not the kissing part, that was entirely deliberate, once it started. The accident was the timing. They'd been arguing about the Triwizard tournament for 20 minutes in the upper garden of the estate, the warm July evening doing nothing to cool either of them down, and Fleur had said something pointed about Harry's tendency to make plans without telling people, and Harry had said something equally pointed about Fleur's tendency to make decisions alone and present them as finished business, and they'd both gone quiet with the specific charged silence of people who've said something true. And are now standing very close together, and then Fleur had looked at him with those grey-blue eyes and Harry had thought oh, and then they'd both moved at the same time. It lasted approximately 4 seconds before Fleur stepped back, and they stood in the upper garden in the July evening looking at each other with expressions that were doing several things simultaneously. Well, Fleur said. Yes, Harry said. A pause of considerable length. I have been, Fleur started. Me too, Harry said. Another pause. This is, she tried again. I know. He looked at her. Is it a problem? She considered this seriously, which was entirely characteristic of her and which he'd always loved about her without having the right word for it yet. She didn't perform reactions. She actually had them. No, she said finally. It is not a problem. She paused. It is possibly a complication. What kind? The kind where Grandmere has known for approximately 3 years and is going to be absolutely insufferable about it. Harry thought about this. She already is absolutely insufferable about most things. Yes, but now she will be insufferable and right, which is worse. But the corner of her mouth was moving, and Harry felt something ease open in his chest, some held thing that had been deciding whether it was allowed, and he laughed, and Fleur laughed too, and the upper garden held both of them in the warm July evening like it had been waiting patiently for this particular moment. They walked back to the house not touching but differently than before, differently in a way that Apollon noticed immediately, because Apollon noticed everything, and said nothing about, because Apollon also knew when to let things find their own way. Gabrielle noticed and said, finally, with the magnificent certainty of an 8-year-old who considers herself an expert on all matters relating to her family, and Fleur told her to go to bed, and Gabrielle went, grinning. Seraphine was in the sitting room when they came in from the garden. She looked at them both with those silver eyes and said nothing at all. "Don't," Harry said. "I didn't say anything," Seraphine said. "You were thinking it very loudly." The corner of Seraphine's mouth did something. She picked up her book and went back to reading. The Triwizard Tournament had been announced in June, via a ministry press release that Hermione had told to Harry with considerable annotation. She'd had opinions about the safety modifications, the age restriction of 17, and the political motivations behind the revival, and she'd written all of them in the margins with the enthusiastic density of someone who'd been sitting on this analysis for weeks. Harry had read the press release, read Hermione's annotations, and written to Seraphine. Her response had been immediate and brief. Dumbledore agreed to this under pressure from the Ministry and the French and Bulgarian magical governments. He is not happy about it. There is a reason the tournament was discontinued. Be attentive. He'd written back, the age restriction is 17. I'm 14. Seraphine, yes. And I notice you are not saying this makes you unconcerned. Harry, someone could put an underage student's name in the goblet. If they wanted to use the tournament to do something to that student. A pause of 2 days. Then, you are correct and I had hoped you wouldn't think of it yet. The Goblet of Fire creates a binding magical contract. If someone submits a student's name and the goblet selects it, the student is magically bound to compete or face significant magical consequences. It is an extraordinarily effective trap. Another line, I am looking into who has the necessary access to the goblet and who would benefit from your forced participation in a dangerous competition. Harry had folded the letter and sat with the specific sensation of being a chess piece that can see the board clearly and is deciding what to do about it. He was not afraid. He was paying attention. Hogwarts in September had the particular energy of a year that knew it was going to be interesting. The older students from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang were the obvious surface excitement. The Beauxbatons contingent arrived in a pale blue carriage drawn by flying horses, which landed in the Hogwarts grounds with considerably more grace than Durmstrang's ship, and Harry stood on the steps next to Ron and watched the Beauxbatons students come down the carriage steps in their pale blue robes. Fleur was at the front of the group. She walked across the Hogwarts grounds with her silver blonde hair and her composed expression and her particular gravity, that quality she'd always had of occupying exactly the space she was in without apology, and she was 14, no 15, and Harry had kissed her 2 months ago and hadn't quite gotten used to what it meant yet. "Merlin," Ron said, with feeling, from beside him. "That's Fleur Delacour," Harry said. Ron turned and looked at him with slow dawning comprehension. "That's Fleur Delacour." "Yes. The one you've been writing to since you were 6. "Yes." "Harry." Ron looked back at Fleur, who was now near enough that the Veela poll was doing things to most of the assembled Hogwarts male population. "Harry, she's, I know," Harry said. "You, Ron." "Right." Ron cleared his throat. "Right, yes, she's lovely, moving on." Fleur reached the steps and looked at Harry with those grey-blue eyes, and her expression did the thing, the composed surface and the warm thing underneath, and she said, in French, "You've grown again." "You noticed in July," Harry said, also in French. "I am noticing again now." She switched to English for Ron's benefit, because Fleur was always aware of who was in a conversation. "You must be Ron Weasley. Harry has told me about you." Ron went slightly pink. "Good things, I hope. He says you play chess like someone who genuinely enjoys chaos, which he considers a talent." Ron looked at Harry. Harry looked at Ron. "It's true," Harry said. Fleur moved on toward the castle, because she had places to be and Beauxbatons protocols to observe. Harry watched her go with the particular feeling that had been living in his chest since July, not new, not sudden, just the thing that had always been there finally admitting what it was. "So," Ron said, beside him. "So," Harry agreed. "How long has, a while. Are you going to, probably?" Ron absorbed this. "Does she, yes." All right, Ron said. That's all right. Good. He paused. Hermione is going to be so smug about this. Hermione has been smug about this since third year, Harry said. The champions were selected on the last evening of October, Halloween, in the Great Hall with the goblet of fire burning its age-old blue-white and the assembled school watching with the collective anticipation of people at a performance they've been promised is spectacular. Victor Krum came out first, which nobody was surprised by. Durmstrang had entered him specifically, the Bulgarian national Quidditch team seeker at 17, and he received his announcement with a composure that Harry read as either genuine calm or extremely good control. Fleur came out second. Her name said Fleur Isabelle Delacour in the goblet's voice, and she rose from the Beauxbatons table with her chin up and her expression giving nothing away, and Harry watched her cross the great hall and thought, she decided. She said almost for most of the summer, and then she decided. He caught her eye as she passed his table. She looked at him with that grey-blue directness, and then she was past him and into the anteroom, composed and contained. Cedric Diggory was selected for Hogwarts, which produced an enormous amount of noise from both his own table and the general population, and Harry looked at the Hufflepuff seventh year with his open, handsome face and his genuine pleasure at being chosen, and thought, he doesn't know this is dangerous. He should be told. He was still thinking this when the goblet of fire, which should have been done, flared a fourth time. The piece of parchment that fell from it was different from the others, older looking, as if it had been in there longer, and Harry saw this from across the hall and his stomach settled into the flat, certain coldness of someone whose worst-case assessment has just been confirmed. Dumbledore read the name aloud. Harry Potter. The great hall went through its own particular silence, the kind that happens when something has occurred that nobody has a ready script for, and then began the noise. Harry didn't move immediately. He sat at the Gryffindor table and let the moment be what it was, looking at the piece of parchment in Dumbledore's hand from across the hall, and he thought, there it is. There's the trap. He stood up. The walk across the great hall was something he'd remember for years, not the noise around it, not the eyes on him, but the quality of his own steps, which were exactly the same as they always were, unhurried and direct, because the only thing fear would have given him here was a story that other people could use about him. He pushed open the door to the anteroom. Fleur was the one who looked at him first. She took in his face, the flatness, the controlled thinking, and her expression changed from surprise to alert. Your name came out of the goblet, she said. Yes, Harry said. You didn't put it in. No. Who did? That's the question, Harry said. Krum was watching him with dark, shrewd eyes. Cedric looked confused and slightly alarmed. Harry looked at the three of them. Someone submitted my name knowing I'm underage, he said. The goblet creates a binding contract. I'm magically obligated to compete or face consequences. This was done deliberately. He paused. I'm not going to pretend I'm surprised, because I'm not. I want you to know that going in, I'm not your competition right now. I'm a problem that's been added to this tournament by whoever set it up. We should probably be aware of the distinction. Krum said, in accented English, you are very calm. I'm very informed, Harry said. It helps. Dumbledore came through the door, with Karkaroff and Madame Maxime and several ministry officials including Bartemius Crouch, who looked at Harry with an expression that was professionally neutral and internally, Harry thought, something else. Something that had the specific quality of a man watching an outcome he'd been involved in producing. He filed it. Looked at Crouch carefully. Looked at Moody, the new Dada professor, who was standing in the doorway with his magical eye spinning in its socket, looking at Harry with an expression Harry couldn't read and wasn't going to trust. Harry, Dumbledore said. Did you put your name in the goblet? No, Harry said. Did you ask an older student to do it for you? No. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. I knew this might happen. I wrote to Seraphine about it in August. She can tell you when. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment, then looked at Crouch. Something passed between the two older men that Harry was going to ask about later. "The contract is binding," Crouch said. "Mr. Potter must compete." "I know," Harry said. "I'm not arguing about that. I'm pointing out that it's a trap and asking you what you intend to do about finding the person who said it." The room was very quiet. "That," said Dumbledore, after a pause, "is an excellent question." He wrote to Seraphine that night with a full account. Her response arrived the following morning before breakfast, which meant she'd been waiting. "I know. I was informed the moment your name appeared. I have a contact at the ministry. This was arranged by someone inside this tournament. Moody. Look at Moody." "Why Moody?" "Because the real Alastor Moody has been missing since August. The ministry confirmed his arrival. Seraphine's contact suggests the person who arrived may not be who he appears." Harry sat with this for a long time. "Polyjuice," he wrote back. "Almost certainly. Someone is maintaining a sustained polyjuice impersonation, which requires monthly doses and extraordinary commitment. This is not amateur work. This is someone with a specific objective, which means someone with instructions. Voldemort is more active than we thought. Be extremely careful, Harry. The tasks are designed to be lethal and someone has your name in the competition. I'll be careful. Also, tell me everything you know about the tasks. I know what I know from history. They vary. The first has traditionally involved magical creatures. Be adaptable. Always am." He folded the letters and went to breakfast, and sat between Ron and Hermione, and told them everything. Ron listened with his jaw slightly tight. He'd gotten better, over the years, at replacing his instinctive anxiety with something more active and useful. Hermione was already writing a list before he'd finished talking, her handwriting getting faster as her thinking accelerated. "Moody," she said. "We need to test it." "Without alerting him that we're testing it," Harry said. "Obviously." She tapped her quill. "If he's on polyjuice there'll be a tell. He'll need to dose monthly and the hour before the dose is when the disguise starts to slip. We need to watch the timing." "I'll watch him in class," Neville said. He'd grown since first year, not dramatically, but steadily, into himself, the way some people do, the roundness of his face becoming the solidness of a person who knew his own value in a particular place. He was extraordinary with plants, genuinely extraordinary, and he'd developed the herbologist's specific quality of noticing small changes, the kind that announced themselves weeks before they became obvious. "I'll notice if something changes." "He's already nervous around me," Harry said. "The magical eye. It tracks me differently than it tracks other people." "Of course it does," Hermione said. "If he's Voldemort's agent and you're the target, yes." She circled something in her notes. "What about the first task?" "I'll be ready for it," Harry said. "What if it's a dragon?" Ron said, and then, when they all looked at him, "I mean, historically, the first task has occasionally been if it's a dragon," Harry said, "then I'll deal with a dragon." Ron looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded, with the expression of someone who has spent 3 years watching Harry deal with things and has made his peace with the fact that the dealing with is generally more effective than the worrying about. "Right," Ron said. "Pass the toast." It was a dragon. Harry found out 4 days before the first task, not from Hagrid's well-meaning leak but from Fleur, who'd been told by Madame Maxime who'd found out through channels that were none of Harry's business. They were sitting in the library, ostensibly doing homework, actually having a quiet argument about the relative merits of the options. "The standard summoning approach," Fleur started. "Takes too long in a live scenario," Harry said. "A nesting Hungarian horntail will move on a stimulus in 4 seconds. I need something faster than the time it takes to complete a full summoning charm. You have been practicing your summoning charm for 3 days. I know. I can do it in under 2. But under 2 seconds in the middle of a task arena is different from under 2 seconds in the library. Fleur pressed her lips together, which meant she was agreeing with something she didn't want to agree with. What else? Something that gives me height. If I'm above it, I control the geometry. He looked at his notes. Wingardium Leviosa won't work on myself. Cushioning charm and a good jump won't get me high enough. I need a broom. The summoning charm, Fleur said. Your broom from your dormitory. During the task. While maintaining spatial awareness of a dragon that's trying to, Harry. She looked at him with those eyes. You are the best flyer I have seen at your age. You are the best flyer I have seen at any age who is not a professional. You know this. Stop deciding you can't do it. The library was quiet around them. Harry looked at his notes. All right, he said. All right, she said. Thank you. The corner of her mouth. Stop thanking me. Go practice. He went and practiced. He could do the summoning charm in 1.4 seconds by the day before the first task. He'd timed himself. The arena was bigger than he'd expected, which helped. He stood in the champion's waiting area and listened to the noise from above, the crowd, the commentary, the specific sound of a magical creature that is not happy about its current living situation, and he thought about the geometry of it. Above the dragon, behind the tail, get to the golden egg and get out. Clean and fast. Fleur went before him. He heard her task from below, the partial crowd reaction that meant something interesting, a held moment, then cheering. He'd ask her about it after. Then his name. The arena was exactly as large as he'd expected, and the dragon was considerably more present than anything you could adequately prepare for, a Hungarian horntail, 50 feet of black-scaled irritated maternal instinct, standing between Harry and the golden egg with the absolute conviction of something that did not consider him a challenge. Harry stood at the arena entrance, looked at the dragon, and spoke his summoning charm. His firebolt arrived in 11 seconds. He was on it and into the air in one motion, and the geometry of the arena resolved itself from above into exactly what he'd pictured, the dragon's blind spots, the angle to the egg, the wind direction off the mountains. He moved. What happened in the next 4 minutes was, in the words of the commentary that Rita Skeeter would later write about in her tournament coverage, remarkable. What it actually was, from Harry's perspective, was a clear series of problems each with a solution, and the solutions were mostly flying and occasionally a well-placed banishing charm when the horntail's tail sweep came too close. He got the egg. He landed. He walked out of the arena with his first-place score, tied with Crumb on dragon avoidance, slightly ahead on egg acquisition time, and the golden egg tucked under his arm. Fleur was waiting at the champion's exit, her first task completed, her score slightly lower than Harry's because she'd had to use a sleeping enchantment on her dragon's eyes and it had partially worked, and there had been an incident with fire and her hair that she was currently not discussing. She looked at him. He looked at her. Broom, she said. Broom, he agreed. I told you. You told me. Something broke loose in her expression, the controlled composure cracking clean open, and she put her arms around him in the corridor, and he held her back with the golden egg digging into both of them, and she said into his shoulder, "Don't do that to me again." I was fine the entire time. I was not fine the entire time, she said, which was the most honest thing she'd said about it, and he knew it. I know, he said, and meant it differently. The Yule Ball was, in Hogwarts tradition, a thing of enormous social complexity. Harry asked Fleur, because obviously he asked Fleur, and she said yes with the particular directness of someone who finds social performance tedious and appreciated being asked without ceremony. Hermione went with Victor Crumb, which produced a reaction from Ron that Hermione herself described as incomprehensible and annoying, and which Harry thought was, actually, pretty comprehensible if you understood Ron Weasley's specific difficulty with saying true things out loud. The ball itself was extraordinary in the way large formal events are extraordinary, beautiful and slightly exhausting, full of good moments and awkward ones. Harry danced with Fleur, who moved like water finding its path, effortless and exact, and they talked under the music about things that had nothing to do with tournaments or politics because for one evening it was possible to simply be 14 and 15 and wearing formal robes in a castle made of magic. "What are you going to do after all this?" Fleur said, at some point in the evening. They were sitting at the edge of the dance floor, the music a comfortable distance away. "After the tournament?" "After all of it. Hogwarts, the tournament, Voldemort coming back." She said it matter-of-factly, not coldly. "After the thing you know is coming that everyone else is hoping won't come." Harry thought about it honestly. "The nation will need a lord who can operate in both worlds," he said. "The British magical world and the European. That's the gap. The British world is isolated and doesn't know it, and that isolation is exactly what Voldemort has always exploited. People who don't have allies." He looked at the dancing. "So. Build the alliances. Fill the gap." "That's a plan," Fleur said. "It's a start." He looked at her. "What about you?" She was quiet for a moment. "I want to work in the ICW. Formal diplomacy. The nation has a seat now, someone has to occupy it with competence." A pause. "And I am very competitive." "I know," Harry said. "You were very competitive with a 14-year-old who should theoretically not have been in the tournament. You were very annoying about your first-place score." "I didn't say anything about it." "Your face said things," Fleur said. He looked at her. She was looking back with those eyes and the curve of the corner of her mouth that was its own language, one he'd been learning for years. "Fleur," he said. "Harry," she said. "I need to tell you something." "I know," she said, which meant she probably actually knew. She usually did. He stopped. He was 4 years of fighting and studying and building something real and he still didn't have a clean way to say this. "You're the first person who found me. In the clearing. And everything that came after, Seraphine and Apollon and Gabrielle and the estate and the education and all of it, it started with you choosing to come back. You didn't have to keep coming back." She was looking at him steadily. "I know what you are to me now," he said. "I just want you to know that I know. That it's not the prophecy or the nation or any of it. It's you specifically. It's always been you specifically." Fleur was quiet for a moment. The music moved around them. "Do you remember," she said, "what I told you in the clearing? The first lesson? That the foundation is the most important part," Harry said. "Yes." She looked at him with those grey-blue eyes. "You are my foundation, Harry. You have been for years. I didn't know what to call it either, for a long time." A pause. "Now I know." The Yule Ball continued around them, oblivious and bright, and they sat with what they'd just said to each other with the particular quality of two people who have finally said something true that they'd been carrying for too long. Then Fleur said, "Also you were absolutely insufferable about the first task score." "I genuinely didn't. Your face, Harry." "My face was perfectly neutral." "Your face has never been neutral in your entire life." He laughed. She laughed. The music kept going. He figured out the egg in February. Not alone, Cedric tipped him toward the bath, and Harry solved the underwater component through a combination of gillyweed and the specific breathing practice that Michelle had included in their physical training because Michelle had had opinions about lung capacity. The second task was cleaner than the first, though the hostage element, the thing they'd taken, held at the bottom of the lake, produced a spike of something cold when he discovered Ron unconscious on the lake floor. He got Ron. He got Gabrielle too, because Fleur hadn't arrived and he wasn't leaving Gabrielle down there regardless of what the task rules said about hostages assigned to other champions. He came up last, with both of them, and the crowd reaction was confused and then warm and then very confused again when the judges conferred and awarded him high marks for moral fiber, which Ron found hilarious and Harry found slightly annoying. Fleur was on the platform when he came out of the water, her eyes bright and her composure entirely gone, and she said something rapid in French that was not quite coherent and then pulled Gabrielle out of Harry's arms and held her. She was fine, Harry said. They were keeping them asleep. She wasn't in any, I know, Fleur said. I know she was fine. She looked at him over Gabrielle's head and her expression was doing something complex and unguarded. Thank you. You would have gotten there, Harry said. I would have gotten there too late, she said, which was a harder thing to say and she said it plainly. He put his hand briefly on her arm. She looked down at it and then back up at him with those eyes. Third task, she said, quietly. I know, he said. I'm watching Moody. Her eyes sharpened. What do you know? Not enough yet. But Seraphine's contact says the transformation schedule should make the disguise unstable around the new moon. I've been watching. There's something wrong with the timing of his movement patterns, he compensates at certain hours. Next new moon is in 2 weeks. I want to be ready before the third task. Fleur looked at him steadily. What do you need? Witnesses I trust, Harry said. And Dumbledore ready to act fast. I can arrange Dumbledore, she said. Since when? Since I am a Triwizard champion from Beau's Batons and I have had 2 conversations with him this month about tournament safety and he is, I think, beginning to understand that I am not simply a competitor. She paused. He asks about you, by the way. He asks carefully, the way he is learning to ask you things. Harry thought about Dumbledore. About the evolving quality of their interactions this year, the headmaster watching him with that complicated expression, making careful gestures, the chocolate and the advanced transfiguration book, the conversation in the anteroom on Halloween where Dumbledore had said I trust your account, Harry before anyone else had said anything at all. He's trying, Harry said. Yes, Fleur agreed. He is trying. It is better than not trying. It is, Harry said. Bartemius Crouch Jr. was caught 3 days before the third task. Not by accident. Harry had spent 2 weeks timing Moody's movements against the lunar calendar Seraphine had sent him, and he'd been right about the new moon. There was an hour, the hour before dawn on the darkest night, when the disguise slipped enough that the person underneath it showed in the set of the shoulders, the particular way the magical eye slowed in its rotation when the polyjuice was at its lowest concentration. He took Dumbledore to Moody's office that morning, and Fleur came, and Pomfrey came with a Veritaserum vial, and what happened in that office was not comfortable to watch but it was definitive. Crouch broke down into confession without much resistance, because the polyjuice was nearly done and the man underneath it had been carrying the weight of sustained impersonation for 9 months and was fundamentally less stable than the role he'd been playing. He told them about the modified maze. The portkey in the trophy. The graveyard. Harry listened to all of it with his hands quiet at his sides and his face very still. Fleur, standing beside him, didn't touch him. But she was close enough that he was aware of her presence the way you are aware of a wall that will hold if you need to lean against it. Someone needs to go into the maze, Harry said, when Crouch had finished. We will modify the maze, Dumbledore said. I can, the portkey is tied to a specific trigger. The trophy. If you modify the maze, whoever gets to the trophy still gets transported. Harry looked at the headmaster. We need to either remove the trophy or substitute it, and we need to do it without alerting anyone monitoring the maze. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. You've been thinking about this since October, he said. I've been thinking about what the end looked like since August, Harry said. When my name came out of the goblet. The whole structure pointed toward an endpoint. This is the endpoint. Let me go in, Fleur said. No, Harry said, without hesitation. Harry, you're in the tournament, Fleur. You can't help from outside the maze once it started. If I go in as a non-competitor, he looked at Dumbledore, can I do that? Go in after the task has started, not as a champion, just as someone. The maze responds to magical signature, not to champion status, Dumbledore said. He was looking at Harry with that expression, the complicated one, the one that had been evolving all year. Theoretically, yes. Then send Crumb and Cedric in normally. Keep Fleur at the entrance on the grounds that her champion assignment is the entrance checkpoint. I go in separately, find the trophy, and swap it before any of them reaches it. He paused. With something that will take whoever touches it to you instead of a graveyard. Silence in the office. Moody, Crouch, was slumped in the corner, his eyes closed. The magical eye had rolled to a stop. If it goes wrong, Fleur said. I know, Harry said. Harry. Her voice was very level. If it goes wrong. He looked at her. Her eyes were grey-blue and direct and entirely serious. If it goes wrong, Seraphine knows everything, he said. The full documentation is in the estate lockbox. She has instructions for it. He held her gaze. But it won't go wrong. I'm not going to a graveyard. She was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded once, the sharp decisive nod of someone who has made a choice they don't like and is committing to it fully. All right, she said. What do you need from me? Stay at the entrance, he said. If Crouch had any backup plans I don't know about, if anything comes at the maze from outside while I'm inside, you're the wall. Something shifted in her face. Not the composure-cracking thing. Something more solid, more prepared. I am the wall, she said. The third task went, largely, as planned. Harry went in through a gap in the maze perimeter that Dumbledore had opened in the outer wall, moving through the hedges quickly, navigating by the specific magical sense that years of training had given him, the awareness of the tournament magic in the maze, the distant presence of the other champions, the hum of the modified portkey ahead of him. He found the trophy in the center of the maze before any of the champions had gotten through the outer challenges, because he knew the maze's magical architecture in a way none of them had needed to know it. He held the trophy and looked at it. A cup, ordinary looking, burning with portkey magic underneath its surface. He put it down, took the substitute from his coat, a trophy replica that Dumbledore had portkeyed to the Hogwarts entrance hall, and swapped them. He put the original in his coat pocket and started back through the maze. He encountered a blast-ended Scroot, which he dealt with efficiently and with no particular drama, and a corridor of the maze that had been hexed into a mirror maze by someone, probably Crouch in an earlier access, that he moved through by keeping his eyes on the ground and navigating by magical texture. He found Victor Crumb near the center, disoriented, which suggested Crouch had gotten to him with a confundus before being caught. Harry oriented him with a brief clear explanation of North and sent him toward the trophy, which he would touch and which would take him to the Hogwarts entrance hall and Dumbledore. He found Cedric Diggory near a sphinx that was asking a riddle, and Cedric had gotten most of it and just needed the last piece, which Harry supplied. He knew the riddle, it was from a 1908 Triwizard documentation he'd read in September, and Cedric looked at him with frank bewilderment and gratitude. "How are you in here?" Cedric said. "Long story. Touch the trophy when you find it, it'll take you somewhere safe." Cedric opened his mouth. "I know," Harry said. "Tell you later. Go." He came out of the maze through the gap he'd entered with the original portkey in his pocket, and Fleur was at the entrance with her wand out and her eyes on the crowds and the expression of someone who has been standing wall for the last 40 minutes and is extremely aware of every movement around her. She looked at him when he emerged. He held up the trophy. She let out a slow, controlled breath. Then Harry went to find Dumbledore. They took Crouch to the Ministry that night. The trials were messy and brief and public. Crouch confessed everything on Veritaserum before a ministry hearing that had been convened with the specific speed of an institution that wanted to control the narrative before the prophet could set it. The confession confirmed what Harry already knew: Voldemort was reforming, gaining strength, had a plan for full return. Fudge was there, in the ministry hearing room, and his face went through an extraordinary sequence of expressions as the confession was read into the record: denial, recalibration, the specific anxiety of a politician confronting something he has publicly insisted isn't happening. Harry sat in the hearing room and watched Fudge's face and thought about what Seraphine had told him: the ministry is not ready. That's not a failure of character. It's a failure of imagination. They cannot conceive of the world changing because they have built their entire position on it not changing. After the hearing, in the corridor, Fudge found Harry and said, "This is a very serious matter, Harry, but I want you to know that the ministry is..." "Minister," Harry said, and his voice was entirely pleasant, "we should talk properly. Not tonight. When you've had time to think about what Crouch said and what it means." He looked at Fudge steadily. "I'm not going to push you for a statement tonight. But the conversation needs to happen, and it needs to happen before July." Fudge blinked. He'd been expecting either deference or confrontation and had gotten neither. "July," he said. "He'll be back by then," Harry said. "Maybe sooner. The intelligence is clear. When he is, you'll want to have a position already established, rather than finding yourself making it up under pressure." He left Fudge standing in the ministry corridor doing the calculations, and went to find his friends. They were in the Hogwarts entrance hall when he got back: Ron, Hermione, Neville, all three of them looking slightly strung out in the way of people who've been waiting at high tension. Fleur was there too, had apparently been there for an hour, and Gabrielle was somehow also there, having been brought from the Beauxbatons carriage by an impulse that nobody had exactly sanctioned but that Apollon, when she arrived 20 minutes later, regarded as entirely sensible. Apollon pulled Harry into a hug that lasted longer than her usual hugs and then held him at arm's length with her dark eyes doing the thing they always did, looking past the surface. "You're all right," she said. "I'm all right," he said. "Good." She smoothed his collar, the collar-smoothing gesture, the one that didn't need doing. "Your hands?" "Fine." He held them up. "No burns this time." "Gloves next time," Fleur said, from somewhere behind him. "I didn't need gloves, there was no gloves, Harry." He turned around to look at her, and she was standing 3 feet away with her arms crossed and her grey-blue eyes full of something that was simultaneously exasperated and enormous, and Harry looked at Fleur Delacour, who had poked him awake in a clearing when he was 6 years old, who had taught him how to fall, who had sat with him under flowering birch trees and told him the foundation was the most important part, and thought, yes. Obviously. Obviously you. "Gloves," he said. She raised one eyebrow very slightly. "I promise," he said. She let him see the thing behind the exasperation, just for a moment. "Just enough." "Good," she said. Dumbledore found them in the entrance hall 20 minutes later, and stood in the doorway with his half-moon spectacles and his beard and his old, complicated eyes, and looked at Harry among his people, the people Harry had gathered and who had gathered to him, Veela and British wizard and Muggleborn and pureblood and the girl from France who had started it all, and the headmaster's face did something that Harry hadn't seen it do before. It settled. Like a man who has been carrying a concern for many years and has just set it down. "The conversation," Dumbledore said to Harry. "The one I owe you. I'd like to have it soon." "Come and find me," Harry said. "I'll be here." Dumbledore nodded once. He looked at all of them, Ron, Hermione, Neville, Apollon, Fleur, Gabrielle, the improbable family of a boy who'd started life in a cupboard, and his expression was something that Harry thought might be relief. He left them to it. Harry sat down on the entrance hall stairs, and Gabrielle climbed up next to him with the automatic familiarity of years, and Fleur sat on his other side, and the rest of them found places around them, and nobody said anything of particular significance for a while. The castle was quiet. Outside the windows, the tournament was over and the lake was still and the mountains were dark against the sky. Harry Potter, 14 years old and Lord of the Silver Nation, sat on the stairs of Hogwarts with the people who were his and felt the world balanced exactly on the edge of what it was about to become. He was ready. Chapter 6, The Lord Declares. Voldemort came back on a Wednesday in June, which felt wrong somehow, like the world should have arranged something more dramatic for the occasion than a midweek morning with thin cloud cover and the smell of cut grass drifting across the Hogwarts grounds. Harry knew before the prophet reported it. He knew before Dumbledore announced it. He knew because Seraphine's bird arrived at his dormitory window at 4 a.m. 3 days after the third task, when the Ministry was still refusing to categorize Crouch's confession as actionable intelligence, and her letter said 3 words in French. Il est revenu. He is back. Harry sat on the edge of his bed and held the letter and felt the thing he'd been preparing for settle into place with the finality of a door closing. Not fear. Not shock. Just the particular gravity of a future that has stopped being theoretical. He wrote back immediately, when? Where? How complete? Her response came with the dawn, last night. A ritual. A graveyard in the British Midlands, we believe Little Hangleton. His Death Eaters were called. Several responded. He has a body now, Harry. He is fully himself. A pause in the letter, a space between lines. He knows you prevented the portkey. He knows about the diary. He knows your name in contexts that go beyond the prophecy he is aware of. He is going to come for you early, before you can consolidate what you are building. You have perhaps 6 weeks before he makes a move. 6 weeks. Harry put the letter down, looked at the grey morning coming in through the dormitory window, and started thinking. The first thing he did was call a meeting. Not a secret meeting, he was done with secrets, had been done with them since first year when he told his friends what he knew and watched them become more useful than he'd imagined precisely because he'd trusted them with truth. He sent notes to Ron, Hermione, and Neville, and he sent a separate note to Fleur who was still at Hogwarts with the Beauxbatons delegation for the post-tournament week, and he asked them all to come to the room of requirement after breakfast. They all came. He laid it out for them completely, the way he always did now, Seraphine's intelligence, his analysis, the timeline, what he thought Voldemort's first move would be. He'll go for the Ministry first, Harry said. Not directly. He's not going to walk into the Ministry building, he's not ready for that yet. He'll go for its credibility. Fudge has been publicly denying the possibility of his return for months. If Voldemort can create incidents that Fudge has to respond to, incidents that Fudge either denies or mischaracterizes, he builds a pattern of institutional failure that erodes trust in the Ministry's ability to protect anyone. And while people are arguing about whether he's back, Hermione said, following the thread with the focus she brought to everything that mattered, he's building. Recruiting. Consolidating. Yes. So we need to force the Ministry's hand, Ron said. Make them acknowledge it before Voldemort sets the timing. We need more than acknowledgement, Harry said. Acknowledgement without action is worse than nothing, it confirms the danger and then demonstrates the response is inadequate. He looked at the map he'd drawn of the relevant power structures, Ministry, ICW, Hogwarts, the various factions of the wizarding world that would matter in a war. We need a coalition. People who know the truth, who have agreed to act on it, who are already positioned before Voldemort forces the crisis. The nation, Fleur said. The nation's the center, Harry agreed. Full ICW member. Real political standing. If Seraphine brings a formal declaration to the Confederation, that the Veela Nation considers the evidence of Voldemort's return conclusive and calls for coordinated response, it forces every other member to declare a position. And some of them won't, Neville said. He'd been quiet through most of it, his broad hands flat on the table, thinking. Some of them will side with inaction. With Fudge. Yes, Harry said. Some will. That's not the goal isn't unanimous agreement, which is impossible. The goal is clear sides before the fighting starts, so nobody can pretend afterward that they didn't know or didn't choose. Hermione looked at her notes. You're going to do this publicly, she said. You're not going to do it through back channels or diplomatic whispers. You're going to stand up in front of everyone and say this. Yes, Harry said. When? Ron said. The ICW has a General Assembly in 2 weeks, Harry said. Seraphine can get me a speaking slot. Not as a student. As the Lord of the Silver Nation. The room of requirement was quiet for a moment. Neville looked at him with his steady brown eyes. You're 14. I know, Harry said. It's going to be part of what I say. He went to Dumbledore that afternoon. The headmaster was in his office, looking older than Harry had seen him look, with the specific weight of someone who has been proven right about something he desperately wished he'd been wrong about. The phoenix on its perch watched Harry come in with those deep orange eyes and made a low sound that wasn't quite a song. Harry sat down. Dumbledore looked at him. You've heard, Dumbledore said. 3 days ago, Harry said. Seraphine's intelligence network is faster than the Ministry's. Yes. A pause. Harry, I want to apologize to you. Harry looked at him steadily. For which part? For placing you with the Dursleys without asking anyone who knew you what that would mean. For the disbursements from your vault, which I intended as administrative expenses and which I understand you froze last year. I should have told you about them and I did not, which was dishonest regardless of intention. For building a strategy around your life without inviting you to participate in building it. Dumbledore's voice was even and old and without performance. I made decisions about your existence because I believed I understood what was necessary. I was not entirely wrong about the necessity. I was entirely wrong about the method. Harry was quiet for a moment. I know your intentions weren't malicious, he said. I've known that for a while. It doesn't make the choices right, but it matters that you know I know it. Dumbledore nodded. I need your help, Harry said. Real help, not managed at arm's length help. The ICW assembly in 2 weeks, I'm going to speak at it. I need Hogwarts to formally support my presence there in the capacity I'm going in as. That requires your endorsement. As headmaster of Hogwarts. And as the most respected voice in British magical society, Harry said. Which you still are, regardless of what Fudge has been saying. That matters. If you endorse what I'm doing, it signals to the people sitting on the fence that there's a credible alternative to Fudge's position. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. You have planned this very carefully. I've been planning it since August, Harry said. When my name came out of the goblet and I understood that Voldemort's return was the Year 4 event, not something further off. How old were you in August? 13, Harry said. The headmaster was quiet. Something moved across his face, not quite grief, not quite admiration, something that partook of both. You have my endorsement, Dumbledore said. Whatever you need from me, Harry. I mean that without qualification. Harry nodded. He stood to go. Then he stopped. One more thing, he said. Sirius Black. Dumbledore went very still. He's innocent, Harry said. You know this. You've known since the Peter Pettigrew situation last year. Pettigrew was alive, which means Sirius didn't kill him, which means the entire case against him was fabricated. Pettigrew is with Voldemort now. He was part of the ritual. He looked at Dumbledore. I need Sirius free before the war starts properly. He's my godfather and I need everyone on my side who should be on my side. Dumbledore looked at him with those blue eyes. The Ministry is going to be busy dealing with the fact that Voldemort is back, Harry said. While they're occupied with that, a case review for Sirius Black is going to look like exactly what it is, a straightforward correction of an injustice. Especially with Pettigrew's confirmed presence at a Death Eater ritual as evidence of his continued existence. He paused. Seraphine has contacts at the Wizengamot. So do you. I do, Dumbledore said. Then let's fix it, Harry said. Before everything else gets complicated. Dumbledore looked at him for a long, thoughtful moment. Then he picked up a quill. Sit down, he said. Let's write the petition together. Harry sat down. He wrote to Sirius that night. He'd been writing to Sirius since 3rd year, when the situation with Pettigrew had come out and Sirius had escaped into hiding, and the letters had started as careful and formal and become, over 18 months, something else entirely, easy, warm, the particular correspondence of two people who share a way of seeing things and have found each other across a bad run of circumstances. Sirius's letters back were funny and sometimes furious and always entirely honest, which Harry valued above almost everything. "Things are moving," Harry wrote. "Dumbledore's working on the petition, he says 6 weeks, which is the same timeline I have for everything else, so we're going to need to be efficient. Stay where you are until I tell you otherwise. I know you want to come out running. I know. But if you come out without the legal clearance it hands Fudge a distraction he doesn't deserve." A pause, then, "We're getting you out, Sirius. For real this time. Hold on." The response came 2 days later, and the handwriting was slightly shaky in the way it got when Sirius was feeling things hard. "You sound like your father when you're being strategically patient, which is a compliment of the highest order and also slightly surreal coming from someone who's known you since you were a baby. I'll hold on. Don't take too long. Also, James would be so bloody proud of you. I hope you know that. Padfoot." Harry read it in the library with Hermione across the table pretending to read and actually watching his face. He folded the letter and put it in his pocket. "All right?" Hermione said. "Yes," Harry said, and meant it absolutely. The morning Fleur left with the Beauxbatons delegation was a grey Tuesday, and Harry walked her to the carriage with 4 minutes before departure while Madame Maxime conducted a head count with the particular efficiency of someone who'd been losing students in interesting locations for 30 years. 2 weeks, Fleur said. 2 weeks, Harry agreed. Geneva. I'll be there with Grandmere. She was looking at him with her composed expression and the warm thing underneath, which he could read now the way you read a language you've spent years learning. "Are you nervous? About the speech?" "No," he said. "Not even a little." He thought about it seriously, the way she'd always appreciated. "I'm nervous about what comes after," he said. "Not the speech itself. The speech is just saying true things. What comes after is everyone deciding what to do with the true things." Fleur looked at him. "You cannot control what comes after." "No," he agreed. "You can only say the true things clearly." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. The carriage horses moved in their traces, restless in the grey morning. "Seraphine is going to be impossible to be around in the days before the speech," Fleur said. "She's been preparing for this her whole life and she will absolutely refuse to admit she's nervous." "I'll deal with Seraphine." "You will try to deal with Seraphine," Fleur corrected. "Nobody deals with Seraphine. You manage her with great delicacy and hope for the best." The corner of her mouth moved. "Maman has been practicing for 30 years. Harry laughed, and Fleur looked at him laughing with her grey-blue eyes and then she stepped forward and kissed him, brief and certain, the way she did things, no performance, just the thing itself. 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks, he said. She went up the carriage steps. He stood in the Hogwarts grounds and watched the pale blue carriage lift into the grey sky and thought, 2 weeks. Then the rest of it. He was ready. The Delacour estate in June was roses and heat and the particular sound of the hills, and Harry arrived 4 days before the assembly because Seraphine had said come early, and when Seraphine said come early she meant it. The estate felt different. Not physically, the terraced garden, the stone, the lavender, the fountain, but in atmosphere, the air of a place that is preparing for something. Seraphine was in the garden every morning when Harry came down, already working, surrounded by documents and correspondence and the small silver and white birds that were the Veela Nation's formal communication system going in and out with the frequency of a busy office. Apollon was managing the logistics, the travel, the formal documentation, the preparation of Harry's speaking credentials for the ICW assembly, which required a specific certification from the Queen Mother that was older than most wizarding legal systems and which Seraphine signed with a deliberate care that made the moment feel like what it was. Gabrielle, who was 9 now and had the Delacour quality of always knowing when something important was happening, stayed close to Harry without making it obvious she was doing so, appearing wherever he was and conducting low-key investigations into whatever he was reading. "Are you scared?" she asked him on the second afternoon, sitting on the wall while he read through the ICW assembly protocols. "No," Harry said. She considered this with the serious face. "Fleur is scared for you." "I know. She won't say it. She never says it." Gabrielle kicked her feet against the wall. "She said it to Maman though. I heard." Harry looked at her. "You were eavesdropping." "I was in the hallway," Gabrielle said, with dignity. "They were talking." "And what did Fleur say to your Maman?" Gabrielle thought about whether to tell him, which took approximately 4 seconds. "She said she's not afraid that you can't do it. She said she knows you can do it. She said she's afraid that you'll do it and it will cost you something." A pause. "Maman said that's what it is to love someone brave." Harry was quiet. "Is that true?" Gabrielle said. "Yes," Harry said. "I think that's exactly true." Gabrielle nodded with the gravity of someone filing important information. Then she looked at his documents. "What does ad hoc procedural insertion mean?" "It means I can add agenda items to the assembly without advance notice if the Queen Mother endorses them," Harry said. "Are you going to?" "Yes," Harry said. She grinned. It was Fleur's grin, quick and bright. "Good," she said. Fleur arrived the evening before the assembly, coming through the flue with her hair slightly displaced and her traveling robes exchanged for the Veela formal dress that Harry hadn't seen before, pale silver white, fitted, with the particular quality of Veela formal wear that managed to be both extraordinarily beautiful and entirely practical, not decorative but ceremonial, carrying the weight of what it represented. She stopped when she saw him in the entrance hall. He'd dressed carefully for the assembly, not Hogwarts robes, not the British wizarding standard. Apollon had prepared something for him, working with a seamstress from Lyon for 3 weeks without telling him what it was until she'd handed it over that morning. Silver grey, the nation's color, with the subtle silver thread at the cuffs that was the Lord's mark, worked into the fabric in a pattern that was invisible until the light caught it and then was unmistakably what it was. Fleur looked at him in it. "Well," she said. "You said that the first time we talked," Harry said. "The first time we talked you were 6 and sleeping in my grandmother's grove," Fleur said. "The circumstances were different." She crossed the entrance hall and straightened his collar, the collar-smoothing gesture, the same one Apollon always did, that he'd come to understand was the Delacour women's version of "I see you and you matter," and looked at him steadily. "How are you?" "Ready," he said. She searched his face for a moment. "Yes," she said. "You are." Seraphine appeared at the top of the stairs in full formal Veela regalia, which was something Harry had not seen before and which was, he thought, one of the most extraordinary things he'd ever looked at, the white hair loose, a silver circlet that was the Queen Mother's crown, the formal robes of the nation's head, and underneath all of it the same woman who drank coffee in the garden and beat him at chess twice a week and called British politics fastidier with precise contempt. She looked at Harry. She looked at him the way she had in the clearing, 9 years ago, when he'd been 6 years old and she'd taken his face in her hands and looked at something behind his eyes and made a declaration with the certainty of someone whose certainty had never failed her. She said something in French, very quiet. Fleur translated it, her voice careful. "She says you are everything she hoped. She says she is not surprised. She says," a brief pause, "she says she is very proud." Harry looked at Seraphine. He thought about 9 years of letters and lessons and chess games and conversations in the garden, about an old woman who had waited 37 years to find the person her prophecy described and had, against all reasonable odds, found a 6-year-old in a Surrey grove and decided he was worth betting everything on. "Tell her," he said to Fleur, "that I know. And that the feeling is mutual." Fleur translated. Seraphine listened, and something moved across her face that was old and complete and entirely itself, and she nodded once. Then she straightened, and the Queen Mother was back, assembled and precise and ready, and she said, "We should leave. ICW pre-assembly briefing begins in 40 minutes and I will not be late." "You've never been late for anything," Apollon said, from somewhere behind Harry. "I know," Seraphine said. "I do not intend to start now." The ICW General Assembly was held in Geneva, in a building that had been constructed in the 18th century for exactly this purpose and showed it, high ceilings, carved stone, the specific resonance of a space that has hosted important decisions for long enough that the walls remember them. The chamber was full. Every member nation had sent its delegation, some larger than others, and the observer status nations and organizations occupied the gallery above, and the press section, magical press from 12 countries, was packed with the specific energy of people who know something significant is about to happen but don't know what shape it's going to take. Harry sat with the Veela Nation's delegation at their formal table, which was new. The table that had previously held observer status placards now bore the silver and white of full membership, positioned in the chamber's main floor instead of the side gallery. Seraphine sat at its head. Harry sat at her right hand, which was the Lord's traditional position, which several neighboring delegations were observing with the careful attention of people trying to determine what exactly they were looking at. Cornelius Fudge was 3 tables to the left, in the British delegation. He looked at Harry when Harry sat down and his expression ran through 5 things in rapid succession before settling on a version of professional blankness that was doing a very poor job of concealing the anxiety underneath. Victor Krum was in the Bulgarian delegation's gallery. He caught Harry's eye across the chamber and gave a brief nod, the specific nod of someone who had been through something with another person and considers it a permanent credential. Madame Fontaine, the Swiss delegate who had been at Hogwarts for the diary incident, was in the neutral block. She looked at Harry with the composed attention of someone who had written a formal report about him once and was now watching the subject of that report operating at considerably higher altitude than the report had captured. Dumbledore was in the chamber's observation gallery, present as Hogwarts headmaster in the educational observer capacity, which gave him a seat but not a voice in proceedings. He found Harry's eyes when Harry scanned the gallery and gave the small nod that had become their version of acknowledgement. The assembly began with the standard procedural matters, and Harry sat through them with the patient attention Seraphine had taught him. Nothing in the assembly was truly procedural. Every motion and countermotion was a small negotiation, a signal, a test of alignment. He watched the British delegation, watched how Fudge moved in relation to the motions, watched who voted with Britain and who didn't. The formal agenda reached its substantive items at the 40-minute mark. The Confederation President, a Finnish which named Ilavainen, compact and precise and clearly competent, began to introduce the scheduled motion on regional security cooperation when Seraphine raised the silver staff that was the Queen Mother's formal address request. Ilavainen acknowledged her. Seraphine stood. She spoke in French first, briefly, the Queen Mother invoking the ad hoc procedural insertion right that was written into the Confederation's oldest charter, and then she switched to English for the Chamber's benefit. The Veela Nation invokes its right of immediate address on a matter of existential urgency to the Confederation's membership, she said. Her voice carried without effort, that low, certain quality filling the chamber. "We call as our witness and principal speaker our Lord, Harry James Potter, speaking in his formal capacity as Lord of the Silver Nation." The chamber made its noise. A significant one: surprise, calculation, the shuffle and murmur of several dozen delegations processing something they hadn't known was coming. Fudge said something to the official beside him, sharp and low. Harry stood up. The noise settled. Rooms did this around him now, had been doing it for years, the particular gravity that comes from someone who walks into them without performing anything. He stood at the Veela Nation's table and let the chamber look at him for a moment, not because he wanted the attention but because the looking was part of the communication. Let them see what they were deciding about. Then he spoke. "I am 14 years old," he said. "I want you to hold that fact in your mind while I speak, not because it makes what I'm about to say more dramatic, but because it is the single most important piece of evidence I'm going to give you." The chamber was very quiet. I have been preparing for this address since I was 10 years old. I have been educated in Veela magical tradition, European political history, and the specific mechanics of how dark power builds and sustains itself, since I was 7. I have personally dismantled 2 of Voldemort's operational artifacts, prevented 1 ritual attempt to return him to power, and identified and exposed his agent within Hogwarts school. I have had formal intelligence correspondence with Fleur Delacour, Queen Mother of the Silver Nation, for 4 years. I have briefing documents going back to my 9th year that map the progression of what has been building in the British magical world and in the broader Confederation sphere. He paused. The reason I am telling you my age and the extent of my preparation is this: a 14-year-old child should not be the most prepared person in this room to address the return of the most dangerous dark wizard of the modern era. But I am. And that is not a testament to my exceptional qualities. It is a testament to how badly this chamber has failed its own mandate. Fudge made a sound. Several delegations shifted. Tom Riddle, Voldemort, returned to full physical form on a Wednesday in June, Harry continued, the same conversational directness, not raising his voice, not needing to. I have the account from Bartemius Crouch Jr., given under Veritaserum and on record with the British Ministry. I have the intelligence from the Silver Nations network, which tracked the ritual components in the months preceding the return. I have the testimony of 4 people who were present at the scene. I have everything except the willingness of the people in this room to hear it. He looked at the British delegation. At Fudge specifically, who was a man in a difficult position and knew it, and who Harry was going to give every opportunity to choose correctly in the next few minutes. Minister Fudge, Harry said, has stated publicly, on 4 separate occasions over the past year, that the threat of Voldemort's return is exaggerated. I understand why. A ministry that acknowledges an existential threat is a ministry that must respond to it, and responding is hard and expensive and politically complicated. Denial is easier. Denial lets you keep the arrangement of things you've built. He looked away from Fudge back to the chamber. But denial is a choice, and choices have consequences, and in this case the consequence is a war that comes while everyone is pretending it isn't coming, which is exactly how the last one went. Voldemort won his first campaign primarily because he moved before the response was organized. Because the wizarding world treated isolated incidents as isolated incidents rather than a coordinated strategy. Because there was no structure for coordinated defense. Because the people with information didn't share it and the people with authority didn't use it. He paused. We are in exactly that moment again. Right now. This week. The chamber was completely still. The Silver Nation is calling for 3 things, Harry said. First, a formal Confederation declaration that the intelligence record constitutes sufficient evidence of Voldemort's return to trigger the emergency security protocols in the Confederation Charter. Those protocols exist. They were written after the last war for exactly this reason. Use them. Second, an immediate intelligence sharing structure between willing member nations, coordinated through the Confederation Security Council, to pool what we know about Death Eater movements and Voldemort's current capability. The information exists. It's in pieces across multiple nations. Put it together. Third, a formal review of the blood magic protections currently in place at the location of our greatest concentration of vulnerable magical children, Hogwarts. He looked at Dumbledore in the gallery. Dumbledore's expression was still, attentive, something private moving behind his eyes. I am housed at Hogwarts, Harry said. I am Voldemort's primary target. The school's protections are excellent and they should be reviewed and strengthened anyway, but my presence there puts other students in proximity to his interest. Professor Dumbledore and I have already begun that conversation. I'm putting it on record here because transparent process matters. He looked at the chamber one more time, taking in the delegations, the gallery, the press section, Fudge with his jaw tight and his options narrowing. I know several of you will vote against the declaration, he said. I know some of you have relationships with the British ministry that make today's vote politically complicated. I know some of you aren't convinced, or aren't convinced enough. That's your right. He paused. But I want you to understand what you're choosing, if you vote no. You're not choosing stability. You're not choosing caution. You're choosing to let a 14-year-old child be the primary organized resistance to the most dangerous dark wizard of the modern era, because the institutions that exist to handle exactly this situation have decided it's inconvenient. You're choosing to make that child responsible for a war that the adults in this room have the authority and the resources to prevent from becoming a war. He let that sit. I'm not afraid of that responsibility, he said quietly. I want to be clear about that. I'm not asking you to save me. I'm asking you to do your jobs. He sat down. The chamber was silent for 3 full seconds, which in a body of this size was its own kind of statement. Then it wasn't silent. The vote took 2 hours. 2 hours of procedural debate, of amendments proposed and withdrawn, of delegations consulting with each other in urgent clusters, of Fudge's representative making 3 separate objections that were each, in their own way, variations on this as premature, and each meeting the wall of documented evidence that Seraphine's legal team had submitted with the speaking request and which was currently in front of every delegate in the chamber. Seraphine sat with the composed stillness of someone who has been waiting for this particular vote for 60 years and can wait 2 more hours without difficulty. Fleur, in the Veela delegation, watched the chamber with her grey-blue eyes and the expression Harry had come to read as I am calculating outcomes and I am cautiously optimistic, but I will not say so until I know. Harry sat and watched the procedural process and thought about nothing in particular, which was a skill Seraphine had taught him deliberately, the ability to be still in the moment before an outcome, to not consume the energy you'll need for after on the anxiety of the during. The vote was called. 22 for the formal declaration. 11 against. 4 abstentions. The emergency security protocols of the ICW Charter were triggered for the first time in 40 years. The chamber noise was extraordinary, not quite chaos, but the controlled chaos of a large body of people processing a significant shift, realigning, calculating, the press section erupting with quills and parchment, and the specific frenzy of people who know they have the story of the decade. Seraphine stood, and the chamber quieted for the Queen Mother's formal acknowledgement. She said 3 words in French, clear and final: La Nation agit. The nation acts. Then she sat down, and Harry looked at her, and she looked at him with those silver eyes, and neither of them said anything, because what had just happened was beyond the register of anything either of them needed to say. Fudge found Harry in the corridor outside the chamber during the recess. He looked like a man who had aged considerably in the past 2 hours and was trying to decide whether to be angry or strategic about it. He chose strategic, which Harry respected. That was, Fudge said, a significant speech. Thank you, Harry said. You've made my position considerably more difficult. Your position was already difficult, Harry said. I've made it more clearly defined, which is different. You know what you have to respond to now. That's actually easier than ambiguity, in the long run. Fudge looked at him with the expression of someone encountering an argument they're not sure they want to follow to its conclusion. You're 14. You've said similar things before, Harry said. The age doesn't change the reasoning. No, Fudge said, with a slight exhale. No, it doesn't. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the stone floor of the corridor. The vote has put me in a position where I cannot publicly deny the return without contradicting the Confederation's formal record. Yes, Harry said. Which means I need a response. Yes, Harry said. And you have thoughts about what that response should be. Harry looked at him steadily. I have complete thoughts about what that response should be, yes. Would you like to hear them? Fudge looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across the minister's face, not quite defeat, not quite relief. The expression of someone who has been arguing against a current and has just accepted that the current is stronger. Come and see me, Fudge said. Next week. Bring whoever you need to bring. I'll bring Dumbledore, Harry said. And Seraphine's political liaison. Fudge absorbed this. Right. He straightened. I'm not, he started, then stopped. You're not a bad man, Harry said. I've never thought you were. You're a man who made a calculation that was wrong. He paused. The calculation going forward is easier. There's a clear choice. Most people make better choices when the options are clear. Fudge looked at him. He seemed to want to say something, several things, and settled on, your parents would be, and then stopped himself. I know, Harry said. I've been told. Fudge nodded once and went back into the chamber, and Harry stood in the corridor and looked at the stone ceiling and thought about serious writing. James would be so bloody proud of you, and felt the particular sensation of things being real rather than theoretical. That evening, the Delacour estate. The garden in June was its most extraordinary version, roses full out, the hills catching the last hour of light, the fountain running, the fig trees heavy and green, the lavender making the air something you could taste. Harry sat on the garden wall, which was where he always sat, and watched the light on the hills. They came out to him one by one, as the evening settled. Neville had travelled to Geneva with them and came out first, because Neville had grown into someone who valued the quiet moment before the celebration, the breath between doing and knowing you'd done. He sat on the wall at a comfortable distance and said nothing, and this was its own form of companionship. Ron came next, with 2 glasses of something Apollon had poured, and gave one to Harry and sat on his other side and said, You know, when I met you on the Hogwarts Express, I thought, he paused, I thought you'd be either very impressive or very strange. I didn't think you'd be both. Is that a problem? Harry said. Mate, Ron said, with complete sincerity, it's the best possible thing. Hermione sat in the garden below them and pulled her knees up and said, the 3 provisions you named. I've been thinking about the intelligence sharing structure, and I think the framework you described is underspecified. The member nations will need a formal submission protocol, otherwise the data quality will be inconsistent. And, can we have this conversation tomorrow? Harry said. Tomorrow, Harry said, and she looked at him and pressed her lips together in the way that meant she agreed but was noting her objection, and then she relaxed against the garden wall and looked at the hills with the expression of someone allowing themselves to be present. Apollon came out and stood in the garden in the June evening and looked at Harry on the wall with her dark eyes, and didn't say anything, just looked at him with that seeing quality she had, and then she smiled, warm and private and complete, and went back inside to the kitchen where something good was happening. Gabrielle appeared from somewhere, having apparently been in the garden all along in the way she had of materializing in places she wanted to be, and climbed up next to Harry and leaned against his arm. Did we win? She said. We got the declaration, Harry said. That's a beginning. Is the beginning enough? He thought about this honestly. The beginning is everything, he said. You can't win without it. She considered this, her small face serious. Fleur says you're going to keep fighting. For a while, Harry said. Yes. She says she's going to fight too. I know, Harry said. I wouldn't expect anything else. Gabrielle nodded, satisfied. Good, she said. Seraphine came last. She came out of the house in her ordinary clothes, the garden clothes, the ones she wore when she was just a woman in her garden and not the Queen Mother of anything, and she walked across the garden with her straight-backed composure and stood in front of the wall and looked at Harry. He jumped down from the wall to be level with her. She took his face in her hands the way she had in the clearing, 9 years ago, and she looked at him with her silver-gray eyes, and this time he could see everything that was in them, the years of it, the waiting and the building and the choosing and the risk and the love that was underneath all of it, that had always been underneath all of it, that she had never articulated because she didn't need to and neither did he. She said something, very quiet. In French. Not for translation. He understood it anyway. He'd understood French for years. There you are, she said. There you finally are. He covered her hands with his and held them, and they stood in the garden in the June evening, the old woman and the boy who had been found in her grove, and the hills caught the last of the light, and the fountain ran, and somewhere inside the house Apollon was cooking and Fleur was coming. He could hear her footsteps on the stone floor, that particular certain step, and none of it was finished, it was only beginning, there was so much ahead. The war and the choices and the cost that Fleur had been afraid of, that love made you afraid of when someone was brave. But here, now, this was real. This was built. This was his. The footsteps reached the garden door, and Harry let go of Seraphine's hands, and he turned to look. Fleur came out into the garden. She looked at him across the evening, and she looked at the people around him, Neville, Ron, Hermione, Gabrielle on the wall, her grandmother standing in the garden with her hands free and her face open, and something in her expression resolved itself into pure, uncomplicated recognition. She crossed the garden to him. "Well?" she said. "Well," he said. She looked at his face for a long moment, reading him the way she'd learned to read him, which was completely and without pretense. "Ready for what comes next?" she said. He looked at her. He looked at all of them. The garden, the hills, the evening light, the weight of it and the rightness of it, the foundation that had been built from a cold October morning and a sleeping boy under a flowering birch tree and a girl who had poked him in the shoulder and changed everything. Yes, Harry said. He had never been more certain of anything in his life. Above them, as the last light left the hills, a single silver birch in the garden corner, planted, Apollon had told him once, by Seraphine 30 years ago, from a cutting of the grove's oldest tree, put out one late bloom. White petals, silver bark, in June. Impossible. Inevitable. There.